shove aside your minty toothpaste and Bluetooth toothbrushes for a moment, because tonight we're time warping back to an age when dental hygiene meant praying your teeth fell out before they killed you. Imagine a world where a smile could double as a crime scene. Yup, that's where we're headed. Hey guys, welcome back to another delightfully distressing episode. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. Picture the year 721 CE. The local monk physician, equal parts barber, butcher, and enthusiastic amateur, leans over a trembling peasant whose jaw feels like it's auditioning for a horror opera. No white coat, no anesthesia, just a rusty iron tool that looks like it was forged for turtle shell soup. Our monk mumbles a quick prayer, covering malpractice insurance, dark age style, and yanks. The tooth pops out like a cork from sour wine, spraying blood across a wooden table already lacquered with centuries of pain. Congratulations. You've just witnessed the medieval extraction ritual, where success is measured by whether the patient faints before or after the infection sets in. Why was it all so gruesome? Start with diet. The so-called Dark Ages loved carbs, before carbs were cool. Porridge, coarse rye bread, dried fruit glued together with sticky honey. Grain was ground between stone millstones, so every loaf came laced with microscopic grit. Chew that daily, and you're basically sandpapering your enamel into confetti. Meanwhile, sugar was scarce, but not non-existent. Nobles splurged on imported cane sugar like it was powdered moon dust, while peasants gnawed on whatever fermented berries they could scrounge. Either way, cavities bloomed like mold on forgotten cheese. Tooth decay wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a gateway for demons, or so people thought. A well-circulated belief claimed tiny toothworms burrowed inside aching molars, nibbling nerves like midnight snacks. If that sounds absurd, remember this was an era when thunderstorms were blamed on dragons with indigestion. Treatments aimed to smoke those worms out. Place a drop of burning henbane seed on the tooth. Let the noxious fumes swirl, and hope the imaginary critters vacate the premises. Side effects included dizziness, hallucinations, and occasionally forgetting your own name. But hey, at least it was cheaper than modern root canals. And yes, mouthwash existed if you stretch the definition. One popular rinse combined vinegar, crushed mint, and stale urine. The logic? Ammonia in urine supposedly disinfected wounds, therefore it could freshen breath. In truth, it probably just replaced death-rot stench with OOD armpit. Still, compared to licking charcoal, another folk remedy, it ranked as peak luxury. Let's talk tools. The dental arsenal of the early Middle Ages was less white gleaming clinic and more blacksmith side hustle. Forceps resembled dungeon shackles. Drills were hand-twirled awls warmed in coals, producing smoke scented with burning tooth pulp. If you were lucky, the practitioner applied a paste of honey and ground cloves afterward to dull pain and seal the wound. If unlucky, they cauterized the socket with a red-hot iron, turning your gum into sizzling bacon. Either way, your next meal, likely thin ale and boiled turnips, would taste delightfully of metal and regret. Strangely, cosmetic dentistry wasn't entirely absent. Among certain Nordic warriors, filing teeth into intimidating ridges signaled bravery, and presumably a high threshold for agony. Contemporary chroniclers marveled at these serrated smiles gleaming through frost-fogged battlefields. Imagine meeting that in a dark alley. Instant intimidation, marginally improved by the fact those teeth were probably coated in yellow tartar like old parchment. Meanwhile, monastic infirmaries doubled as early research labs. Monks meticulously copied Roman medical texts, cherry-picking remedies that sounded less like torture and more like kitchen experiments. One manuscript advises simmering crushed garlic, goat fat, and wine into a gloopy balm, then stuffing it into cavities with a goose feather. The mix supposedly quenches the tooth fire. Translation: overwhelms nerves until they surrender from sensory overload. Another recipe recommends chewing green fennel for pleasant fragrance, though anyone downwind might debate the pleasant part. Let's not ignore social stratification. Nobles had marginally better options. itinerant surgeons fluent in Latin, fragrant oils shipped from Byzantium, maybe even ivory dentures carved by craftsmen who'd never seen a toothbrush. Peasants, conversely, trusted village wise women armed with herbal poultices and questionable chants. A common chant went, "Out worm, with bone for horn, flee to hill, stay till morn." The patient repeated it thrice, spitting between each recitation. If pain persisted, clearly the spell lacked enthusiasm. Repeat until numb or toothless. Speaking of numbness, alcohol was universal anesthesia. Ale, mead, or cheap red wine was guzzled until the world blurred into comforting beige. Then the practitioner struck fast, leveraging brute strength and momentum. No countdown, no sterile gloves, just a swift jerk and a hope you wouldn't vomit on their shoes. Post-op instructions? Swish with salt water if you had any. Otherwise, just let nature decide whether you lived long enough to complain. What about preventative care? Surprisingly, chewing sticks, precursors to toothbrushes, made cameos. Stripped twigs of hazel, willow, or licorice root were gnawed until one end frayed into bristles. These primitive brushes scraped plaque, leaving behind faint herbal flavor. In Northumbria, archaeological digs unearthed birch tar chewing gum studded with tooth marks, suggesting people instinctively chewed resin to clean teeth and maybe ease hunger pangs. Even in grim centuries, humans sought any excuse to masticate something that wasn't boiled oat sludge. Yet every ray of hope casts a shadow. The church often framed bodily suffering as divine reminder of earthly sin. Toothache, therefore, could be penance, an opportunity to meditate on your failures while nerves pulsed like church bells. Pilgrims limped to relics of Saint Apollonia, patroness of dentistry, whose own teeth were famously shattered by torturers. Pray at her shrine, light a beeswax candle, and maybe, just maybe, the searing agony would subside. If not, at least you'd earn spiritual frequent flyer miles. Let's zoom in on one unfortunate soul, Edric the Tanner, circa 842 CE records. Okay, gossip scratched on a tavern wall. Claim he endured a decade-long abscess the size of a quail egg. Desperate, he consulted a famed healer outside York who specialized in bloodletting of the jaw. Translation: slice gum, drain pus, recite psalms. Edric did feel relief. For 2 weeks, infection returned with vengeance, creeping into his bloodstream. When fever finally claimed him, locals swore they heard demonic squeals escaping his mouth, confirming toothworm's exit strategy. Moral of the story? Sometimes the cure is worse, but the disease is downright operatic. Yet medieval folk weren't entirely clueless. They observed connections between certain herbs and reduced pain. Clove oil, for instance, contains eugenol, an actual antiseptic, something modern dentists still value. Medieval apothecaries soaked wool in clove tincture and wedged it beside aching molars, a hack that occasionally worked. Similarly, myrrh resin, imported via Perilous caravan routes, found use as a mouth rinse, lending incense-sweetened breath that doubled as social currency during feast hall flirting attempts. Nothing says romance like, "I bought exotic tree sap so your nose survives my conversational distance." Then there's the curious case of dental jewelry. A Visigothic burial near present-day Spain revealed a warrior whose incisors were drilled and inlaid with tiny emerald shards. Was it status? Ritual? Maybe he wanted to distract enemies with bedazzling bling. Whatever the motive, drilling without modern bits required patience and, presumably, a captive wooden spoon to bite down on. One slip and you're chipping enamel like flint. Talk about commitment to the bit, literally. Daily maintenance advice circulated in manuscripts. Rinse with cold water after meals. Avoid black bread if teeth throb. Don't sleep with a mouthful of walnuts. Despite draconian remedies, these snippets show embryonic understanding of cause and effect. Unfortunately, social upheaval, Viking raids, crop failures, plague, often relegated oral health behind staying alive till dawn. When winter gnawed villages, saving a sack of grain outranked saving molars. Let's pause at monasteries again, because their scriptoriums weren't just for copying psalms. Monks recorded medical case notes. Brother Ethelwerd of Glastonbury compiled a tract on toothkin ills, noting correlations between prolonged breastfeeding, a rarity among peasantry, and stronger adult teeth. He advocated feeding children goat milk only after their second year, a revolutionary, albeit impractical, guideline. No surprise, his suggestions spread slower than plague-infested fleas. Meanwhile, traveling charlatans offered miracle powders, ground deer antler mixed with crushed pearls and holy dust scraped from cathedral altars. Price? 2 chickens and the family's only brass candlestick. Did it work? Probably not, but shimmering grit masked plaque stains, giving the illusion of whiter smiles until gums bled like overripe berries. Welcome to Medieval Marketing 101. Promise radiance, deliver hemorrhage. As the centuries trudged on, contact with the Islamic world reintroduced Greco-Roman medical texts long forgotten in Western Europe. Translations of Galen and Hippocrates dribbled through Moorish Spain, reigniting scholarly interest. Physicians in Salerno began distinguishing toothache origins. Hollow pain signaled decay, throbbing implied abscess, sharp sting hinted gum disease. Even rudimentary classification marked progress. Still, without antibiotics, success hinged on whether a patient's immune system could out-wrestle bacteria armed with nothing more than stale breath freshener. In the end, survival often meant acceptance. Losing teeth by 40 was normal. Grandmothers gummed broth, telling grandchildren cautionary tales about sweet cakes. Smiles in medieval art appear tight-lipped, not because painters lacked skill, but because subjects guarded their dental devastation like state secrets. Show too many teeth and you reveal social standing, dietary sins, maybe even past bouts with that rogue barber who doubled as town executioner. So next time you complain about flossing, remember, your ancestors once paid coin, sheep, or spiritual absolution just to have an abscess lanced with a farm tool. They gargled vinegar urine cocktails, smoked imaginary worms, and called it Tuesday. Their perseverance, or sheer stubbornness, paved the aching, blood-spattered road to modern dentistry. And that, dear viewer, is worth a grateful grin, tartared or not. Let's pick up where we left off, with medieval folks clenching their rotten teeth through prayer, pain, and a thick fog of superstition. If you thought tooth demons and goat fat balm were the worst of it, oh no, we're just getting warmed up. Because in the Dark Ages, the real dental nightmare didn't end at the jawline. It spread, like an untreated infection, into culture, faith, commerce, and even battlefield strategy. Yes, you heard that right. In some medieval circles, bad breath was considered a tactical advantage. If you'd had a molar rotting for a few years and your mouth smelled like a fermented turnip cellar, you could clear out an enemy trench faster than a cavalry charge. Some chroniclers swore by the foul exhalations of the northern tribes, blaming their unbearable stench not just on diet, but on their total refusal to clean their mouths, even with twigs. One monk referred to their breath as the devil's fog. Romantic. And speaking of monks, let's revisit these guys because they were the closest thing the Dark Ages had to a dental school. Monastic medicine was a strange mix of copied Roman knowledge, local herbal lore, and divine guesswork. In their attempt to catalog the body's maladies, they got particularly creative about oral care. Take the rule of Saint Benedict, for example. It dictated everything from when monks should sleep to how many figs they could eat. But hidden in some of the expanded commentaries was advice like, avoid speaking after the evening meal, lest the warmth of the tongue invite rot to the teeth. Imagine believing your nightly gossip was a dental health risk. Monks became so obsessed with discipline that even teeth were supposed to follow spiritual order. No aching, no biting, and above all, no vanity. Which brings us to one of the strangest paradoxes of Dark Age dentistry. The mouth was both feared and revered. The church had a complicated relationship with teeth. On the one hand, open mouths were considered undignified, especially for women. To be seen laughing or smiling broadly was immodest, because it meant exposing your filthy, pox-ridden teeth to the world. On the other hand, saints' teeth were often treated as holy relics. Bits of enamel allegedly ripped from the jaws of martyred saints were encased in jeweled reliquaries and paraded through towns like dental Oscars. People believed these fragments held healing powers. Pilgrims with abscesses would crawl for days to kiss the petrified molars of Saint Medard or Saint Apollonia. Did it help? Number. But sometimes belief is the most potent anesthetic of all, especially when your other option is having a blacksmith yank out your tooth with fire-heated tongs and a prayer to St. Jude, the patron saint of lost causes. Meanwhile, dentistry was slowly becoming a side hustle. You didn't need a license, just a sharp object and a strong stomach. Traveling barbers and tooth drawers made a living by setting up in village squares, laying out their rust-stained tools, and offering extractions for a few copper coins, or the equivalent in geese, eggs, or shame. These public tooth pullings were spectacles. Crowds would gather like it was theater, children snacking on barley bread as grown men screamed like they were being flayed alive. The tooth drawer would often perform tricks, balancing his extraction pliers on his nose, dancing with a sack of blood-soaked gauze, or holding up the freshly removed molar like a trophy. If the patient survived, he might get a sip of mead or a chunk of honeycomb. If he passed out, even better for the audience. It was this kind of unregulated dentistry that led to one of the most infamous medieval dental disasters in history, the blood mouth of Béziers. According to 12th century accounts, a traveling doctor named Henri Lavache, Henri the Cow, great name, claimed he could cure any oral affliction with his miracle salve. The salve was, in fact, goose fat mixed with pig dung, boiled in old ale and stirred with a fishbone cross. He'd smear this foul potion on your gums, chant a bastardized Latin prayer, then knock out your tooth with a mallet. One summer, a plague of mouth infections swept through Béziers, and good old Henri saw his chance. Within weeks, dozens of people had lost half their teeth, some even died of sepsis, and Henri vanished with a sack of silver and a donkey named Prudence. His legend lived on, and so did the phrase Béziers Grand, used to describe someone whose teeth looked like they'd lost a bar fight with a shovel. But let's talk about actual medieval cures, because even among the horror, there were attempts at genuine care. Herbal compendiums listed dozens of toothache treatments, most of which sound like recipes from a wizard with head trauma. Some favorites: rub the gums with ashes of burnt mouse, chew a mixture of crushed beetle shells and mint, tie a dead mole around your neck to draw the pain away, place a frog in your mouth and whisper your pain into it, before releasing it at a crossroads. These weren't jokes. People actually did these things. There are documented cases of frog whispering rituals in 10th century Saxony, where patients swore by the relief, probably because the frog hopped off with their last shred of dignity. And if you were a woman, your choices were even more limited. Many medical texts didn't bother to include dental care for women, assuming their oral pain was punishment for Eve's original sin or a sign of witchcraft. Midwives and wise women often treated female patients in secret, using herbs like meadowsweet and chamomile, or more unorthodox remedies like kissing a black cat during a full moon. You might chuckle, but when your jaw feels like it's exploding and the church won't help, a purring feline starts to sound like a pretty solid plan B. Let's not forget medieval cookery, which was as much a dental threat as a culinary experience. Even the nobles with their elaborate feasts weren't immune. Spit-roasted peacocks, meat pies thick with bone shards and sticky preserves, laced with unfiltered sugar, all tore at enamel like acid. Knights who survived battle often lost more teeth to dessert than to swords. One 11th century poem describes a noblewoman so obsessed with candied figs that her breath reeked of tombs, and her smile glittered like cracked glass. Romance. And what about dental prosthetics? Oh yes, those existed, but don't get excited. Early dentures were usually made from the teeth of the dead. Grave robbing became a low-key industry in some towns. Battlefield scavengers would yank intact teeth from corpses and sell them to enterprising toothsmiths, who'd wire them into wooden plates for wealthy clients. These dentures were as decorative as they were dysfunctional. One nobleman reportedly removed his set before dinner because it screamed with every bite. There was also the bizarre trend of false front teeth made from ivory, bone, or even seashells. Some were attached with silk cords that wrapped around remaining teeth or tied behind the head like a grotesque masquerade mask. One poor fellow in Normandy had his shell teeth forcibly removed after they gave him what witnesses called the devil's rattle every time he sneezed. Dental hygiene for children? Practically non-existent. Baby teeth fell out on their own, and by the time adult teeth came in, kids were already working in fields, drinking unfiltered water, and eating moldy rye. It was rare for anyone but the nobility to survive into old age with their full set. The average peasant probably lost most of their teeth by age 30, becoming prematurely ancient, gumming root vegetables and smiling like a sack of wet bread. And of course, when all else failed, when the teeth throbbed, the gums oozed, and hope faded into medieval moonlight, there was always one last resort: the blacksmith. Yes, The same man who shod your oxen and forged your pitchfork could also serve as emergency dentist. His toolkit, pliers, hammer, glowing hot nails, and a grim determination. One infamous case from Hungary tells of a blacksmith named Istvan who gained a reputation for his merciful extractions. People traveled from 3 villages over to have him remove their rotting teeth using the iron jaw method, essentially clamping your head between 2 wooden blocks while he pried your molar out like a bent horseshoe. Did it hurt? Absolutely, but his success rate was reportedly better than most monks. They say he sang folk songs during the procedure to distract patients. If that didn't work, he just hit them with a mallet first. What we see here, again and again, is not ignorance, but survival. The Dark Ages weren't dark because people were stupid. They were dark because options were few, danger was constant, and information traveled slower than a limping goat. People used what they had: herbs, animals, prayer, superstition, blacksmiths, and grit, literal grit, as in the stone dust bread that was slowly sanding their teeth into oblivion. And amid all this chaos, they still laughed, still kissed, still sang songs with verses like, "My teeth be gone, but still I grin. For what is pain but proof within? The Lord took one, the blacksmith too. I chew with gums and pray I'm through." That's the heart of medieval dental care: humor and horror, resilience and rot, and a whole lot of really bad breath. Stay tuned for part 3, because yes, things do get worse. Let's say you're a humble peasant in the year 985. You've already had your back molar removed by a man who also brands pigs for a living. You chew mostly on the left side of your mouth because the right side feels like it's harboring a nest of hornets. Your breath could fell a horse at 20 paces, and yet, somehow, you're doing better than average. Because now, friends, we must discuss infection, not just toothache, not just decay. We are talking about the kind of swelling that turns a human face into something resembling a sack of boiling porridge. Abscesses, ulcers, fistulas, pockets of pus that built up pressure like a cursed volcano and sometimes exploded mid-mass. And yes, there are written accounts of that. In one notorious case from 1012, a Saxon reeve named Athelgar suffered from what monks called God's boil of the mouth. The left side of his jaw swelled to twice its size. Instead of seeking a remedy, because he feared demons would enter the wound, he tied a leather strap around his face and kept it that way for 2 months. When it finally ruptured during Easter service, the resulting splash cleared 3 pews and was described by a witness as milk of the devil's cow. No one sat in that section of the church ever again. Now, if you were slightly more educated, or just lucky enough to live near a monastery with a halfway competent herbalist, you might try a poultice instead. Popular ingredients included crushed garlic for drawing out evil vapors, bear grease for softening the demon's grip, and ground pearl, which did nothing but sounded expensive. And if your face looked like a swollen turnip about to split, time for lancing. This was often done with a red-hot needle or knife to cauterize the soul's passage. The burning pain was supposedly good for you. The more it hurts, the more God tests thy strength, wrote one friar, shortly after causing a patient to faint straight into a puddle of his own drool. Let's not skip the worst fate of all, osteomyelitis, a bone infection of the jaw. Without antibiotics, it could spread rapidly. Monks often mistook it for possession. Victims were sometimes chained, given no food but blessed broth, and made to sleep on hay while prayers were screamed into their ears. One account tells of a woman in Anjou who was strapped to a cartwheel for a week while her jaw turned black. Her recovery was attributed to divine intervention, but historians now believe she simply outlasted the local superstition. And while all this was happening to the common folk, what were the nobles doing for their teeth? Oh, they were suffering too, just in a more luxurious way. The aristocracy had access to imported spices like cloves and cinnamon, which they chewed not for taste, but to mask their horrible halitosis. They also dabbled in early mouthwashes made of boiled vinegar, sage, and urine. Yes, you read that right. Human urine. Some claimed the urine of a red-haired boy was best, though no one seemed to ask the red-haired boys how they felt about this career path. And let's not forget courtly love. Nothing says romance like a lute serenade and a mouthful of rotting teeth. Poets praised rosy cheeks and breath like mead, but that was pure fiction. If anything, courtship often involved carefully timed silence and not standing too close. Some noblewomen would press cloves between their gums before conversation, while men might swish wine around their mouths and spit discreetly into a servant's handkerchief before entering a room. There's even evidence that royal dentists existed, though they were more torturers than healers. The court of Charlemagne had a man known as Le Main d'Or, or the Golden Hand, who used bronze instruments to clean the emperor's teeth. His method: scrape until the bleeding stopped. His patients were given sweetened wine and a leather strap to bite during the procedure. One scribe noted that after a session, His Majesty was pale, but smiled still, as if death had brushed his lips. Let us now pivot, horrifyingly, toward the battlefield, because warfare and dental trauma went hand in jagged hand. Helmets protected the skull, but not always the face. Swords, maces, and arrows shattered jaws like dry clay. And once those teeth were gone, no modern surgeon was stitching anything back together. Soldiers often used metal plates or leather masks to hide disfigurement. Some even carved wooden teeth and glued them into their gums with beeswax. Not effective, but if you'd lost your canines to a mace, you'd try anything to avoid looking like a cave goblin. And battlefield dentistry had its own traditions. Captured enemies sometimes had their teeth removed as punishment, or trophies. Viking sagas mention warriors who filed their teeth into points and stained them with ash to look more fearsome. But more often, the mouth was just collateral damage, and a ruined jaw meant retirement from the battlefield, or a slow decline into begging and soup you didn't have to chew. As for the church, well, they had opinions. They always had opinions. Some clergy taught that dental suffering was a trial from God, meant to humble the proud and silence the gluttonous. Monks were forbidden from excessive chewing. Yes, that was a rule, and were encouraged to fast during oral pain, because nothing says divine enlightenment like starving with a toothache. But it wasn't all doom and gloom. Some medieval cultures made noble attempts at rational care. In Islamic Spain, scholars like Al-Zahrawi, Al-Bukhasis, wrote about dental instruments and surgical techniques with surprising clarity. He described tools for scaling teeth, removing tartar, and even replacing missing teeth with carved bone. His work was centuries ahead of its time, but good luck accessing it if you lived in the swampy backwoods of England, where the local healer thought bleeding you through your gums could relieve sinus pressure. Let's not skip over the oral hygiene tools of the average person. Toothpicks were common, often made from bird bones, hedgehog spines, or sticks from holy trees. People carried them in belts like little weapons. Some wealthier individuals even had gold toothpicks, because nothing says luxury like scraping plaque off your molars with the precious metal. Tooth cleaning powders existed too, though they were often made of crushed eggshell, ash, and salt. These were rubbed on the teeth with cloth or fingers. In rare cases, brushes were made from animal hair, tied to twigs, but most people simply chewed on sticks. If you chewed enough, the fibers frayed and became a sort of brush. The downside: you might also be chewing wood beetles, fungus, or poison ivy. Details. Now, if you were lucky enough to keep your teeth relatively healthy, and by healthy, we mean not actively rotting out, you still had to guard against what medieval scholars called toothworms. Yes, let's talk about those. Toothworms were an accepted medical reality in many parts of Europe. People believed tiny creatures lived inside your teeth and gnawed their way out when the pain became unbearable. The explanation? Sometimes abscesses leaked black pus or fibrous material, and lacking microscopes, people assumed it was a worm. This theory persisted well into the 17th century. Remedies included smoking the worm out, literally by puffing burning herbs into your open mouth, or luring it out with honey. If the worm refused to leave, you were doomed to suffer. One 13th century French healer suggested that singing to the toothworm might soothe it. Another suggested fasting for 3 days while wearing only white linen to show the worm you meant no harm. A kind of medieval oral peace negotiation. And all this agony, this pustule-lance, toothworm-believing, frog-mouth-kissing agony, was endured without anesthetics. No Novocaine, no nitrous oxide, just prayers, alcohol, and maybe a friend to hold your arms down. The truth is, for every person who got their rotten molar pulled and lived to eat soft bread again, another died from the infection or suffered in silence for years. Some lost their hearing or eyesight from dental abscesses that spread to the sinuses or brain. Others had their entire lower jaw disintegrate from necrosis. And yet, people kept going. They married, they sang, they worked, they whispered stories by the fire with half their teeth gone, breath steaming in the cold. Because in the Dark Ages, you didn't have the luxury of waiting for better times. You either endured, or you didn't, and those who did carried their scars in their smiles, or lack thereof. The Dark Ages were nothing if not resourceful, so of course the people who lived through them found ways to turn their gruesome dental realities into fashion statements. Begin with the simplest vanity, white teeth. Medieval Europe associated a pale, gleaming smile with spiritual purity and noble lineage. Ironic, considering few mouths were either. Courtly manuals advised rinsing with a concoction of ground sage, salt, and ashes sifted from a saint's shrine. The mixture scoured enamel like river sand, but produced a fleeting chalky brightness. Noble ladies then tinted their lips with crushed madder root to deepen the contrast, hoping suitors would notice color before odor. Results varied. One Burgundian chronicler wrote that Lady Isabeau's smile dazzled like sun on snow, but her breath reeked of cellar rot, causing even drunk knights to stagger back. Yet some aristocrats went further and filed their incisors into delicate points, believing the serrated look recalled the fangs of mythical griffins, guardians of treasure and honor. Filing was performed with pumice stones soaked in vinegar. Victims bit on a leather thong while a servant rasped away enamel under candlelight. Minutes felt like eternities, and many fainted before the final point appeared. Infection followed regularly. More than one griffin-toothed noble died of blood poisoning, turning their quest for glamour into a cautionary ballad performed by tavern bards for years. Among the lower classes, innovation took humbler forms. Shepherds in the Pyrenees chewed fresh pine resin each dawn, believing the sticky sap trapped mouth spirits that caused decay and incidentally freshened breath with a turpentine aroma. Highland farmers mixed powdered oak bark into goat milk and swished it nightly. Tannins stained teeth a walnut brown, but stains trumped cavities in their calculus of suffering. Meanwhile, Baltic fishers swore by rubbing seal fat across gums to seal out cold winds. Their smiles glistened like oiled lamps, which may explain why Norse traders called them seal mouths, with grudging respect and mild revulsion. Marriage prospects only amplified dental anxiety. A contemporary Slavic proverb warned, "Choose not a bride whose teeth rattle like dry bones," implying that loose teeth foretold infertility and early widowhood. Matchmakers inspected mouths as meticulously as dowries. In Bohemia, a guild of tooth whisperers emerged, women who claimed they could tighten a bride's wobbly molars with rituals involving hawthorn smoke, whispered charms, and a secret paste of egg yolk and snail shell. Brides paid in silver buttons or lengths of homespun linen. Whether the ritual succeeded was secondary to simply being seen attempting it. Kissing customs adapted accordingly. The church condemned open-mouthed kisses as pathways for sin and disease, but that was only half the deterrent. Lovers developed the forehead press, touching brows to signal affection while avoiding lethal halitosis. In Provence, couples exchanged perfumed linen squares instead of kisses. One lover inhaled the other's scarf, murmuring poetry about wild time and distant seas. Venetian courtiers perfected the air kiss, lips pursed inches apart, a practice that survived plagues and eventually evolved into modern cheek kissing etiquette, proof that dental hardship sometimes shaped lingering social norms. Still, for every clever workaround there was equal folly. Consider the fad for jeweled dental inlays among Visigothic elites. Skilled smiths drilled cavities into front teeth and set garnets or tiny gold studs, sealed with resin. The sparkle at feasts was breathtaking when torchlight struck the gems, right up until the tooth cracked or fell out. A priest in Toledo lamented that nobles sell their bite for vanity, noting that imported gems cost more than repairing a village well. Moral sermons did nothing. Glimmering mouths spread through Iberia until Moorish physicians condemned the practice as slow suicide. If jewels were the luxury of Iberia, dog teeth were the pragmatism of Northern Europe. Tanners and hunters routinely bartered hound fangs to itinerant denture makers. Dog teeth resembled human canines closely enough, and sources were plentiful. Packs guarded farms, fought wolves, and often died doing it. Craftsmen boiled jaws to loosen sockets, then scraped and polished each tooth before wiring them onto thin bronze plates. Wearers strapped the plate inside the lower lip with leather cords looped behind their ears. Functionality was laughable. Chewing caused the plate to rattle like dice in a cup. But aesthetically, sharp ivory in a peasant's mouth suggested ferocity, which deterred tavern bullies and maybe the occasional tax collector. Priests debated whether wearing dog parts invited animalistic spirits, yet even clerics sometimes resorted to the practice after losing teeth to scurvy during long Lenten fasts. One account describes Abbot Fulbert of Rouen preaching Easter Mass with a bright canine jutting from his smile, mesmerizing congregants more effectively than any homily. Fulbert called it a gift from St. Hubert, patron of hunters. Skeptics whispered that it was merely a mastiff's molar, but Saint's endorsements were hard to refute. Fashion shifted again when traders from the Levant brought cloves, cardamom, and miswak, a fibrous twig chewed for oral hygiene in the Islamic world. European nobility took up miswak as an exotic novelty. Artisans carved silver cases to carry the sticks, dangling them from girdles like talismans. Markets in Venice sold bundles at outrageous prices, and poets penned verses to "The twig that cures sorrowed breath." Unfortunately, some buyers misunderstood and swallowed splinters, lodging them in throats, which led physicians to warn against Eastern sticks of strangulation. Nonetheless, the habit introduced Europe to the idea of daily cleansing motions more delicate than chewing coarse wood. While hygiene crept forward, folk cures refused to die. In the Rhineland, people believed a tooth buried beneath a hawthorn would regrow in heaven, guaranteeing its owner a perfect smile in the afterlife. Graveyards sprouted miniature tooth plots, each with tiny wooden markers. In Ireland, the banshee tooth myth claimed that if you threw an extracted molar into a peat bog under a new moon, the banshee would trade you a painless death for your offering. Archaeologists have since recovered dozens of teeth from bogs, silent testimony to desperate barter with folklore. Royal courts continued to set trends, even disastrous ones. Queen Fastrada of East Francia supposedly freshened her breath with a paste of ground pearls and vinegar distilled from rare figs. Empress Theophanu introduced Byzantine tooth powder scented with rose. These luxuries trickled downward via imitation. Bakers mixed chalk into rye flour to mimic pearl whiteness, and barrel coopers soaked staves in rose water, advertising bloom-scented ale that left drinkers' tongues smelling floral for minutes. Unfortunately, chalk bread accelerated erosion, and rose-infused ale fermented unpredictably, sometimes exploding barrels and smashing teeth with flying staves. Fashion is pain, literally. Guilds responded with regulation. Parisian ordinances of the late 12th century fined bakers for adulterating bread with earthy whiteners. Tooth drawers in London had to display extracted teeth on strings by their stalls to prove experience. A grotesque resume fluttering in the wind. Customers compared sizes and routes like fishmongers judging cod. Competition spurred questionable promotions. Free leeching with every extraction, or buy 2 poles, get 1 cautery free. Testimonials were painted on boards. Hugh Miller lost 6 teeth and still lives. A medieval yelp aching with bravado. Scientific inquiry flickered at universities. Salerno's medical school lectured on balancing humors via diet. Avoid over-hot foods that inflame the gums, and eat cooling cucumbers for calm saliva. In Bologna, scholars dissected corpses and sketched jaw anatomy, noting nerve pathways yet lacking means to dull them. Their diagrams spread slowly in manuscript copies. A village healer might glimpse one decades later, misinterpret the drawing, and decide nerves were tiny worms after all. Progress walked with leaden shoes. Outside scholarly circles, plague reshaped dental attitudes. During the Black Death, many blamed foul breath for spreading miasma. People clutched pomanders, hollow silver balls packed with spices, against their mouths, inadvertently improving oral odor. There are accounts of survivors crediting clove fumes for sparing them. Post-plague, clove chewing exploded in popularity. Demand outpaced supply, triggering spice wars in distant oceans. Thus, a microbial catastrophe indirectly financed Europe's obsession with mouth-pleasing aromatics. Not all innovations aimed to charm. Norse sagas mention warriors carving runes into their front teeth to spell terror words, blood-filled grooves that turn smiles into messages of doom. Scholars debate authenticity, but skeletal evidence from Swedish graves shows etched vertical lines, possibly decorative or ritualistic. Whatever their purpose, the etchings weakened enamel, dooming wearers to early loss, a literal price for intimidation. Children's teeth inspire their own lore. In Lombardy, parents offered lost baby teeth to house mice, believing the rodent would grant strong incisors in exchange. They placed the tooth in a walnut shell on the hearth. A nibbled shell by morning signaled success. Scholars see early traces of the tooth fairy myth here, though the rewards were sturdier molars rather than coinage. Mice, alas, seldom respected the bargain, and many Lombards grew up as gap-toothed as their parents. By the late 13th century, proto-dentistry began to consolidate. Some cities licensed specialized dentatores. They learned extraction, scaling, and rudimentary splinting from translated Arabic texts. Their tools evolved: iron pelicans for gripping roots, scalers shaped like stylized birds, foot-powered drills adapted from jewelers' bow lathes. Affluent merchants paid for reimplantation. The dentator pulled a loose tooth, scraped the socket, packed it with wine-soaked cotton, and hammered the tooth back in. Occasionally it took, frequently it rotted. Success stories spread faster than failures, fueling demand. Toward the series' end, it becomes clear that medieval people, however misguided their methods, shared our modern obsession with appearance, comfort, and health. They swapped recipes, compared remedies, and endured unimaginable agony to salvage a semblance of a smile. Their legacy is a graveyard of cracked enamel, and also the first glimmerings of dentistry as a craft. And so, we close the latch on this fetid medieval mouth. The next time you complain about your dentist's drill pitch or the taste of fluoride rinse, pause and picture a monk with squirrel jaw pliers chanting psalms while smoke curls from cauterized gum. Remember, the dog-tooth dentures clacking at a winter feast, the jewel-inlaid incisors shattered by a toast, the bride whispering vows through clenched cloves lest her breath derail matrimony. Then open wide, let the hygienist scrape, and thank every sainted molar that progressed. Slow, bloody, ridiculous progress carried us from that gothic nightmare to a world where pain is optional, infection is treatable, and fashion no longer requires filing fang points under flickering torchlight. Imagine you're 8 months pregnant, it's the winter of 1287, and your cottage smells like wet wool, onion soup, and the lingering sins of everyone who's ever lived there. Outside, sleet hammers the thatch, and somewhere in the yard, your husband is debating whether the cow or the midwife will arrive first. You're sitting on a rickety stool, gut swollen and ankles the size of turnips, wondering if tonight you'll greet a healthy baby or St. Peter, depending on which one's schedule is freer. 10 seconds. That's how long it takes to picture every possible disaster, from breech birth to plague, and realize the nearest doctor owns more leeches than actual medical knowledge. 5 more seconds, and you remember half the babies on your street never made it past their first week. Welcome to medieval childbirth. Hold on to something, preferably your sanity, because you'll need both hands free for screaming. Pregnancy in the Middle Ages began the same way it does now. Awkward fumbling followed by 9 months of unsolicited advice. Except medieval advice came from neighbors who thought sneezing during a full moon could unseat the fetus. The village gossip network functioned as a proto-internet, except every comment was wrong and delivered while churning butter. Eat too many figs and you'll birth a slippery child. Skip mass and your baby will be born hairy. Dream of fish and expect twins. Dream of eels and expect judgment. Nobody kept a journal, but everyone had theories, and they all contradicted each other. Prenatal care revolved around herbs, prayers, and straight-up bribery of the supernatural. A woman might not bless palm leaves under her bodice, swallow powdered oyster shell for strength, or rub goose fat on her belly so the baby would glide out. Wealthier ladies consulted manuscripts like the Trotula, which suggested everything from baths in ewe's milk to scented pessaries packed with cinnamon and honey. Poorer women simply hoped the local midwife had sober hands and clean fingernails, both rare luxuries. The midwife herself was equal parts healer, witch, and neighborhood therapist. She knew who was cheating, who was drinking, and which lucky charm went with which saint. Her resume was composed mainly of rumors that she'd only lost 2 mothers this decade. A pregnant woman's diet was a roulette wheel of superstition. Avoid hare meat lest the child be born with a rabbit lip. Steer clear of roasted owl or you'll summon nighttime spirits. Eat almonds for wisdom, pomegranates for loyalty, and bread crusts to ensure firm bones. These prescriptions collided with scarcity. If harvest failed, diet reduced to whatever hadn't spoiled, often mold-flecked rye that caused ergot poisoning, convulsions and hallucinations packaged as God's testing. Imagine explaining to your midwife that the Virgin Mary just floated by the hearth and told you to drink more goat urine. She'd probably nod and reach for her pouch of dried nettles, standard treatment for visions, cramps, and occasionally fending off angry geese. Pregnancy stages were tracked less by weeks and more by omens. Quickening, the first flutter of movement, meant 3 things. The child had a soul, heavy chores were to be avoided, and every relative now felt entitled to poke your belly like an overripe cheese. Bleeding gums, swelling, and sciatica were dismissed as the humors rearranging. Morning sickness, a sign the baby would become a poet, clearly a curse severe enough to warrant extra prayers. Stretch marks attracted their own folklore. Lines pointing upward foretold a boy who'd become a knight. Downward meant a girl destined for the convent. Crisscross patterns warned of twins who'd fight each other in the womb, like biblical Jacob and Esau. Every mark on a woman's body became prophecy, no pressure. As the due date approached, preparations began. Forget hospital bags. A birthing room involved pushing furniture aside, hanging fresh linens against the draft, and tacking religious icons near the bed. These weren't for ambiance. They served as spiritual insurance if things went south. A relic of Saint Margaret, patroness of childbirth, was worth its weight in gold. Some women held tiny saint bones between their teeth to pass contractions. Chew too hard, and you risked biting a holy finger, guaranteeing both divine intervention and a chipped molar. Labor itself usually unfolded on a birthing stool, an ingenious contraption resembling a 3-legged chair with a convenient hole in the seat. Gravity did half the work. The other half was done by midwives shouting encouragement, prayers, and occasionally insults if the mother seemed lazy. Husband participation varied. Nobles might pace halls clutching swords, because masculinity, while peasants fetched water, boiled rags, or simply vanished to the tavern until screams subsided. Legend tells of one Danish farmer who pressed his ear against the cottage wall to listen for the baby's spirit, fainted at the first shriek, and was revived hours later with cold ale, and a brand new daughter he promised never to disappoint, unless livestock prices dropped. Pain relief was imaginative. Some midwives relied on mandrake steeped in wine. The root's narcotic effect dulled agony, but occasionally knocked out both mother and child. Others applied poppy poultices to the abdomen. Dosage accuracy was impossible, so relief teetered between blissful numbness and near-fatal stupor. If herbs failed, distraction was next. Chanting litanies, squeezing prayer beads, or biting down on a stick carved with protective runes. For the poorest women, pain relief meant gripping the rafters and howling every profanity known to Anglo-Saxon vernacular. Complications were legion. Breech presentations required manual turning, midwife arms deep in darkness, praying not to tear anything essential. Hemorrhage was common, so was infection, though nobody knew why some mothers spiked fevers hours after a successful birth. The best safeguard was speed. Midwives boasted of delivering infants before the church bell struck thrice. But speed could be lethal. One ill-placed tug on the umbilical cord, and a healthy baby became an emergency footnote. And if the mother died, tragedy collided with theology. The church decreed an unbaptized fetus condemned to limbo. So priests sometimes performed Caesarean baptisms, slitting open deceased mothers to sprinkle holy water on stillborns. Success was improbable, but the ritual soothed community guilt, proof they'd done everything humanly and divinely possible. When births ended well, celebration erupted instantly. The placenta, viewed as the child's mystical twin, was buried beneath hearthstones to bind the baby's soul to home. Some families salted and dried it as talismanic jerky. Feed a crumb to the child on their first fever, and recovery was guaranteed, or choking, whichever came first. Naming followed fast, often within a day, lest death steal the infant before they gained an identity. godparents were roped in, sometimes at sword point, to ensure earthly guardianship. Gifts rolled in, swaddling cloths, amulets of wolf teeth to ward off nightmares, or, for the elite, tiny silver spoons implying the baby might someday chew something softer than gruel. Postpartum lying in locked new mothers indoors for weeks, theoretically to heal, practically to isolate them from spirits attracted by childbirth blood. Neighbors delivered broth, gossip, and advice, including the ever-popular recommendation to drink beer for the milk. Monastic physicians endorsed warm ale spiced with caraway, claiming it stoked inner fires and warded off cold humors, which apparently hovered around bedrooms like spectral drafts. Sex was strictly forbidden until the church performed a purification rite, because nothing screams romance like a priest blessing your loins before you're allowed back in the marital bed. Meanwhile, infant survival was a dice roll. Colic, diarrhea, fever, every ailment threatened to undo hours of labor. Mothers swaddled babies into rigid burritos, believing straight limbs meant righteous souls. They dangled charms carved with the word Agla, a mystical acronym meaning, "Thou art mighty forever, O Lord," over cradles to deter demons. If sickness struck, remedies ranged from goat milk enemas to smearing rabbit fat on the fontanelle. Should all fail, the midwife whispered an emergency baptism rite, because even a teaspoon of sanctity might tip the celestial scales. Through it all, women formed quiet sisterhoods. They shared secrets in hushed tones between contractions, promised to wet nurse each other's orphans, and invented lullabies that doubled as coded prayers. Men recorded battles, kings, and treaties. Women recorded bloodlines and whispered stories, stitched inside quilts and preserved through the simple act of survival. Every safe delivery added one more voice to a lineage singing cradle songs under smoke-darkened beams. And so part one ends not with triumph or tragedy alone, but with the exhausted lull of a candlelit room, a newborn squeaking like a barn mouse, a mother drifting between pain and wonder, and a midwife wiping her hands on an apron already stained with half the village's history. Outside, the night wind whistles through wattle walls, carrying rumors of war, plague, and famine, but for one fragile heartbeat, this family is whole. The real tests, fevers, teething, future pregnancies, lurk just over the horizon, yet the mere act of drawing breath tonight counts as victory, a defiant spark against the medieval dark. By the time the village rooster wheezes out its second crow, our new medieval mother is already awake, though awake might be generous. She's half propped on straw pillows that smell like damp dog, her abdomen throbbing like a badly tuned lute, and her chest leaking colostrum through a linen shift as scratchy as monk's penance. Beside her, the baby sleeps swaddled so tightly the child could pass for a small loaf of rye, except rye loaves rarely shriek at random intervals. For one fleeting heartbeat, things seem almost peaceful, until the door creaks open and 8 women file in. Aunts, cousins, neighbor ladies, the midwife again, plus one self-appointed herb-wise crone who pokes the air like she's carving invisible runes. They come bearing broth, opinions, and enough superstition to gag a bishop. First topic, the mother's milk. According to half the room, it's cursed until blessed by a priest. The other half insists the priest will jinx it because clergymen attract jealous spirits. Consensus: none. So they settle on compromise, trace a cross on each breast with beet juice, symbolic and nutritionally irrelevant, while chanting the opening lines of Psalm 23. Nobody quite remembers the words, so the chant devolves into mumbling that resembles bees drunk on cider. The midwife shrugs. She's seen worse. She once delivered twins while relatives argued whether to braid garlic into the umbilical cord or burn it for incense. Both sides compromised by doing neither and blaming each other when one twin caught a chill. Postpartum hygiene now takes center stage. Remember, water in medieval villages is less crystal stream and more cow-flavored soup, so full baths are a luxury bordering on suicide. Instead, the midwife heats ale mixed with rosemary and fenugreek, then sponges the mother's thighs with the concoction. The smell is ambitious. It's supposed to close wounds, deter infection, and ward off elves who allegedly slip through cracked doors to pinch healing flesh. Does it work? Sometimes. Mostly it leaves everyone smelling like a salad left too near the hearth. But at least the mother's wounds are rinsed, and the ale's alcohol might kill a microbe or two, assuming the microbes haven't already evolved into amphibious philosophers. While this medicated dabbing commences, Aunt Gertrude waves a pewter spoon over the baby's face. She recites a rhyme promising strong bones and compliant manners. The spoon must be pewter, never iron. Iron wards off fairies, but can offend household spirits who watch over infants. In a culture where half the medical canon involves negotiating with unseen forces, material science seldom stands a chance. The baby coughs as if skeptical, but the rite proceeds. Gertrude then smears a dab of honey on the child's lips. Honey is antibacterial in theory, but this jar has likely been stretched with barley malt, so it's equal parts sugar and fermenting mush. Still, tradition dictates sweetness first, a symbolic bribe to keep life's bitterness at bay, at least until teething. Outside, church bells clang lauds summoning the faithful to dawn prayers. One cousin crosses herself twice, worried that postpartum bleeding might keep demons lingering. She advises fumigating the room with juniper smoke. The crone counters, juniper brings dry heat, dangerous for newborn lungs. They compromise again, burning just a pinch, enough to choke a sparrow, but hopefully not the infant. The smoke thickens, swirling between rafters already cloaked in decades of soot. Someone cracks a window. Winter air barges in, and the baby wails at the temperature war. So begins day one of motherhood, mediating between hot, cold, dry, wet, holy, unholy, and every relative's pet theory. Enter the father. He tiptoes as if the floorboards might explode. His contribution to postpartum care involves presenting a gift. A crude wooden rattle carved to resemble a rooster, symbolic of beginnings, vigilance, and some whisper male ego. He places it beside the swaddle, kisses his wife's damp forehead, and flees when the women start asking whether he slaughtered a chicken for the placenta stew. Placenta stew? Yes, certain regions simmer it with onions and beer, believing the mother should reabsorb her strength. Other areas bury it beneath an elder tree to tether the child's soul to ancestral soil. This village splits the difference. A token slice will flavor tomorrow's soup, while the rest goes to the tree. Culinary compromise meets spiritual hedging. Now focus shifts to contraception, or as medieval folk labeled it, spacing God's gifts without angering him. Breastfeeding doubles as birth control in theory. Yet everyone knows neighbors who became pregnant with a toddler still at the teat. So herbal wisdom steps in. Pennyroyal, rue, or wild carrot seeds are whispered about like clandestine state secrets. The midwife discreetly hands the mother a sachet of dried lady's delight leaves and instructs her to steep them in wine on days when the moon wanes. This too cool the womb and slow fertility. The church forbids such meddling, but the church is currently 2 valleys away fighting heresy, so pragmatic survival trumps doctrine, privately, quietly, behind shuttered windows. Speaking of the church, purification looms on the calendar, a ceremony called churching scheduled 40 days postpartum. Until then, the mother is considered unclean and technically barred from sacred spaces. She must wear a white veil if stepping outdoors, symbolizing penitent liminality. Some women relish the forced rest, others chafe under isolation, especially when livestock need tending. Our mother calculates she'll miss the year's final cheese market, such as medieval maternity leave, 40 days of spiritual quarantine formatted by male theologians who've never bled a minute in childbirth. Meanwhile, the baby's fragile health demands constant vigilance. Fever? Apply cool cabbage leaves. Rash? Rub with lard and marigold petals. Colic? Swing the bundle over threshold stones while reciting a charm about St. Bridget's sacred cow. Each remedy carries a backstory. Someone's cousin's goat herder swore it worked, or a saint performed a miracle on a similar Tuesday. Evidence is anecdotal, placebo-potent, and hope essential. Failures are chalked up to fate or sin. The mother quietly counts how many of her siblings are buried beyond the churchyard gate. She hums a lullaby that's half prayer, half warning. Sleep, my sprout, the night is cold. Breathe soft and quiet, safe from hold of creeping fiend and fever bold. Wet nursing now enters conversation. Noble women outsource lactation to peasant wet nurses. Peasants sometimes share among relatives when maternal milk dries up. But wet nurses can pass along personality traits, or so rumor says. A moody nurse breeds a sullen child. A glutton makes a greedy one. Contracts may stipulate dietary codes. No onions, no strong ale, no gossiping. Break the terms, and payment, usually grain or fabric, gets halved. Our mother contemplates sending the baby to a cousin in the next village whose milk supply overflows, but the thought of separation claws at her heart. She decides to tough it out, beet juice crosses and all. At night the house quiets except for labored breaths and distant wolf howls. The mother bolts upright at every infant squeak, terrified of accidental smothering, a common killer before bassinets gained guardrails. She props the swaddle in a wooden cradle filled with warm sheep wool and dangles a tiny iron knife over the rim. Iron repels fairies intent on swapping the baby for a changeling. Whether iron wards night terrors or simply dangles dangerously above a newborn's face is never questioned. Tradition trumps hazard assessment every time. Day 3 brings the gossip's feast, a semi-formal gathering where women toast the mother with spiced wine and trade childbirth stories like battle scars. One recounts birthing twins in a pigsty during a blizzard, another boasts of laboring only one miserere psalm long. Humor masks trauma. They laugh about tearing from London to Rome, but eyes glaze when describing stillbirths. Community trauma, recycled as wisdom, fortifies resilience. Between tales they stitch baby clothes from scraps, linen if you're lucky, hemp if not, dyed with walnut husk to hide inevitable stains. The midwife inspects stitches, both the mother's garment hems and her bodily ones. Any sign of infection, look for pus like green whey, warmth like foxfire, stench like devil's breath. Lacking antibiotics, she prescribes mashed plantain leaves bound to skin with lamb gut. She also ties a bracelet of red wool around the mother's wrist, red being Mars's color, to grant strength. Astrology and pathology share the same bed in medieval medicine, an awkward couple that somehow stays married for centuries. As weeks crawl by, the father returns to fieldwork, and the mother faces the terror hour alone. That twilight stretch when baby lungs summon banshee tones, goats demand milking, and supper won't cook itself. She juggles chores while wearing the infant in a sling made from her only decent shawl. Every clang of the blacksmith's hammer down the lane could startle milk dry. The term postpartum depression doesn't exist, but songs from this era hint at it. Verses where mothers plead with the moon to trade bodies, to float silent above worry and woe. The church advises prayer, neighbors recommend ale. She opts for both, a whispered of and a gulp from the communal jug. Finally, the 40th day arrives. She washes in tepid rainwater laced with dried rose petals, dons her cleanest kirtle and limps to church. The priest meets her at the porch, murmurs, Latin nobody, but he understands, sprinkles holy water and leads her to the altar. She kneels, thanks the Virgin for survival, and, in that same breath, begs mercy for next time, because medieval math expects multiple pregnancies if death doesn't beat her first. The ritual restores her to society's good graces. She can sit in church, gossip at market, and, grimly, share her bed again as soon as her husband's appetite eclipses caution. Night falls on ceremony day, and a neighbor pounds at the door. Another woman is in labor across the lane, and the midwife is needed. Our mother, still sore but seasoned by exactly 6 weeks of motherhood, volunteers to hold the oil lamp. In medieval villages, community duty never rests. She steps into icy mud, lamp flickering, and trudges toward fresh screams, that all too familiar symphony of agony and hope. The cycle continues, relentless as the turning of a millstone. Each birth drags ancient fears into torchlight and deposits fresh stories for tomorrow's feast. Back in her own cottage, after assisting with a complicated delivery that ends mercifully in healthy twins, she collapses onto straw. Her baby gurgles, reaching stubby fingers toward the ceiling beams where wood smoke ghosts dance. She realizes how profoundly ordinary her ordeal now feels. Horrific in detail, miraculous in survival, yet stitched seamlessly into village life. No chronicles will record her name, but every coo from the cradle is a footnote in humanity's longest narrative, endurance. She hums a lullaby half lull, half ledger of lessons learned. Never trust cold moonlight on an open wound. Always keep pennyroyal hidden from priests, and thank any saint within earshot when the wailing finally fades into sleep. Tomorrow she'll worry about teething, baptismal feasts, and the ominous cough rattling through the next hamlet. Tonight, she folds exhaustion around her like an extra blanket, swears she hears distant angels, or maybe owls, and lets eyelids drift shut. In medieval arithmetic, pain plus survival equals grace. Grace plus time equals another tale to tell. And tales, after all, are what keep villages alive long after their timber roofs collapse to dust. 3 months blur by in a haze of sleepless nights and herbal fumes, and suddenly our medieval mother is back on her feet, or at least wobbling near upright, because survival in the Middle Ages allows no extended sabbaticals. Spring mud thaws into ankle-deep soup, sheep need shearing, and plague rumors lurk like gossiping ravens. She ties the baby to her torso with a length of faded wool, grabs a wooden pail and trudges to the communal well, an open invitation for every passing neighbor to critique her parenting. One claims the child's eyes are too wide, proof she must bathe the infant in donkey milk. Another warns that carrying a baby so close to the heart breeds over-attachment, a sin of softness. She nods politely while muttering the only effective medieval mantra, "May Saint Swithin bless your unsolicited advice." Everybody in town is an expert because child-rearing doubles as social currency. Want status? Be the woman whose baby sleeps through thunderstorms, whose toddlers recite paternosters before they can squat without falling over. Fail, and you're whispered about like a smudge of mold on holy bread. So she keeps up appearances, even if appearance is all that holds back the suspicion that every sneeze foreshadows doom. Infant mortality hovers like smoke from peat fires, always present, occasionally choking. 1 in 4 babies won't see their first birthday. Everyone knows several little graves bordered by chipped tiles or a broken toy. Our mother hums lullabies louder than statistics, pretending melody can outshout math. Daily care is improvisation blended with inherited superstition. Diapers don't exist in any comfortable form, so linen scraps and hope must suffice. A cesspit behind the cottage becomes the drop zone for soiled rags. Once a week she scrubs them in lye-soaked water that stings cuts and memories alike. If linen runs low, moss pads stand in, naturally antiseptic, the midwife claims, though antiseptic is a word 2 centuries premature. She strings moss bundles over the hearth to dry, inhaling damp earth until it feels normal that her house smells like a forest floor, with performance anxiety. Breastfeeding remains the frontline defense against starvation. Her diet is barley gruel, onions, and whatever roots survive the cellar's winter damp. For protein, she sifts weevils from grain. Extra crunch equals extra iron. She still sneaks Lady's Delight tea when the moon wanes, because another pregnancy before her stitches vanish would be as welcome as a Viking tax collector. Yet fertility is relentless. Church sermons thunder about multiplying like lilies of the field. Reality translates that into aching hips and tombstones. The stonemason can carve blindfolded. Illness arrives uninvited one drizzly dawn. The baby's skin blooms scarlet blotches, and a rattle buzzes in its chest like a jar of angry wasps. Neighbors debate whether it's wind evil, elf shot, or simply winter lungs. Remedies pour in. A blacksmith's wife suggests warming a steel nail in the forge, dipping it in ale and skimming the foam over the infant's lips. Heat frightens away malevolent spirits. A shepherd swears by lamb grease rubbed on the spine. The herb-wise crone returns, thrusting a bundle of dried yarrow, and orders the mother to brew it into a bitter potion, then spit a mouthful into each of the baby's ears while reciting the creed backward. The mother does every step, including the spitting, which earns her an appreciative coo from the infant and a look of abject horror from her visiting cousin. When the rash fades by week's end, the town hails the treatment as a miracle. Nobody credits the body's immune system or dumb luck. Testimonials travel faster than horsemen on decent roads. By midsummer, a woman 2 villages away is sprinkling forge foam on her feverish twins. If they survive, the method engraves itself deeper into rural doctrine. If not, a new remedy will replace it by Advent. Meanwhile, the father's world tilts between field labor and feudal obligations. He owes his lord 10 days of plowing, 3 geese, and 1 healthy wife capable of future heirs. If she dies in childbirth, he still owes the geese. Consequently, he hovers more than medieval custom dictates. Partly from love, partly from terror of widowhood, finds the manor court levies on remarriage paperwork. His presence is a double-edged blessing. He can calm the baby with low humming learned from coaxing stubborn oxen, but he can also disrupt delicate routines by insisting on dipping the child's pacifier, a knucklebone wrapped in linen, in mead to build fortitude. Mead knocks the infant out for hours, which everyone calls a parenting triumph, until the next wail shatters the rafters at midnight. Spiritual oversight intensifies once the baby approaches baptism. The church insists baptism ensures salvation. Local gossip insists it also prevents shape-shifting. The priest recommends prompt scheduling, but logistical chaos intervenes. Rivers flood, wolves haunt the road, and the priest's horse throws a shoe. When he finally arrives, the ceremony is crammed into Sunday vespers. Parents, godparents, and assorted onlookers cram around a stone font crusted with candle drippings, water tinged green from algae sluices over the baby's head. The infant gasps, screams, and is declared cleansed. Afterwards, everyone parades to the cottage for celebratory pottage, thin enough to see the wooden bowl's grain. They toast the child's soul and publicly predict a long life. Privately, each adult wonders whether the tiny lungs can withstand the coming winter fever. Seasons wheel onward. By harvest, the infant, now a pudgy half-year-old, tries to crawl. Flooring is trodden earth strewn with straw, ideal for practicing face plants but perfect for breeding fleas. The solution? Smudge smoke from dried sage and juniper to drive insects away, then scatter crushed mint so every wiggle releases a fresh scent. The mint failing, they turn to cats, half-tame mousers who double as flea magnets. The baby learns delight from grabbing tails. The cats learn warp speed escape. Somewhere in this chaos, the mother discovers if she strings lavender under the bedding, nighttime cries lessen. Is it aromatherapy or simple suffocation of lice? She doesn't care. 5 consecutive hours of sleep feels like canonization. Community obligations resume their claim on her limbs. The manor's reeve demands women join in bringing the harvest, for the good of all souls, which loosely translates to cheap labor. She leaves the baby with a still nursing neighbor, heart thudding like a blacksmith's bellows the whole day. Returning at dusk, she finds the infant smelling of someone else's milk and wailing in confusion. Guilt slams harder than a drawbridge. Medieval moms invent mom guilt centuries before pamphlets and parenting forums make it fashionable. She sings the child to sleep with a new lullaby praising St. Catherine, patron of spinning wheels, because singing about saints counts as prayer, and prayer counts as insurance. As the baby grows teeth, tiny ivory shards erupting through swollen gums, so does risk of death by infection from teething wounds. The standard fix is amber beads strung tight around the neck, said to draw pain outward. Merchants sell polished Baltic amber at prices that could rescue a drowning barn roof. Unable to afford new beads, the mother scavenges an old one from her dead sister's coffer, rethreads it on hemp, and hopes sentiment enhances efficacy. She also refrigerates a linen strip in the frost-cooled water barrel and lets the baby gum it, inadvertently inventing a proto-teething ring. Nutrition shifts when the child hits 9 months. Gruel thinned with goat milk gives way to mashed peas, soft cheese, and occasionally a shred of salted fish, if the catch wasn't rotten by midday. Everyone believes certain foods imprint character: carrots for red hair, walnuts for sharp intellect, leeks for honesty. She feeds the baby leeks, not caring whether honesty is ideal in a social climate where truth can invite witchcraft accusations. Better an honest accused witch than a lying sycophant with scurvy. Statistically, both die young anyway, but she wagers on personal preference. Wolves have ears, and they also have woodworms, so it's unsurprising when news filters through that a royal decree now restricts midwifery to those licensed by the bishop's seat, an early attempt at medical regulation. The local midwife scoffs. No bishop will ride swamp roads to audit her blood-stained stool. Still, tension simmers. If churchmen seize childbirth, the sacred female domain might collapse under male authority. The midwife responds by memorizing more herbal chants, because knowledge doubles as weapon when credentials don't exist. Winter creeps in on taloned winds. Sleet rattles shutters like vengeful bones. The baby coughs again, and the mother's pulse hitches. She digs out the crone's ration of hedgehog fat, yes, hedgehog, and warms it with thyme over embers. She rubs the salve on the infant's chest, murmuring a half-remembered Latin fragment. The smell is a roadkill with a mint garnish, but the cough eases. She doesn't analyze. Correlation equals causation when fear writes the ledger. Life threads its beadwork of monotony and panic. A neighbor hemorrhages during her 7th delivery. The midwife can't stanch the blood, and the woman bleeds out before dawn. At the funeral, fresh mothers clutch babies closer, as though proximity to death triggers karmic audits. The priest's sermon blames Eve's curse. The women's eyes say otherwise. They blame wheat shortages, relentless pregnancies, and the male reluctance to understand female pain beyond theological metaphors. Little milestones gleam in the gloom. The baby's first laugh, echoing like silver bells across sagging rafters. Tiny fingers discovering the joy of banging pot lids. The night he sleeps blissfully through an owl-infested storm. Each success is a coin tossed into fate's upturned cap. The mother hoards them because fate sometimes tips the cap and pockets everything. By the year's turning, the infant totters unaided, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. He claps when snowflakes drift through roof cracks and melt on his tongue. The mother, brushing straw from her skirts, feels something like defiance unfurl. She has kept a child alive against lice, hunger, and cosmic indifference. Her hips ache, her hair is threaded with premature gray, and church bells still peal reminders of mortal fragility, but her son stands. In this era, standing is practically a graduation ceremony. Soon enough, new fears will sprout: pox, bad harvests, conscription for some distant lord's quarrel. Another pregnancy may already quicken inside her, monthly courses skipped, a familiar fatigue draping her bones. Yet for one glimmering afternoon, low sun painting icicles gold outside the smoke hole, she watches her baby stomp straw, and she almost believes time itself is merciful. Her laughter joins his, rising like sparks. And though night will fall, and wolves will prowl, and saints will sleep, a mother in the Middle Ages sows hope into every ragged breath, because hope, unlike linen, never frays no matter how many winters claw at the seams. Winter loosens its icy grip, and rumors ride the meltwater. A troubadour brings word of a grand fair 2 days' walk away, where pilgrims swarm to venerate a relic, a finger bone of Saint Anne, reputed to guarantee safe childbirth to any woman who touches it. Our mother, now visibly pregnant again, feels the news strike like a church bell in her ribs. The first pregnancy still aches in memory, and the graves of 3 neighbor women sit raw on the hillside. She decides the pilgrimage is worth every blister. The journey begins before dawn. She bundles her sturdy toddler onto a small sled fashioned from a split ale barrel, ties a hemp rope around her waist, and trudges alongside a loose caravan of neighbors. Fields glisten with thaw, and the scent of wet manure mixes with candle smoke from distant farm shrines. Along the rutted track, each woman clutches her own talisman: amber beads, hare's foot, dried rose petals, just in case the saint's relic fails to notice them. The men shoulder sacks of grain to barter, or bottles of cider to bribe toll keepers, but they walk behind, because the pregnant women set the pace, and in this rare moment everyone accepts it. At nightfall they camp beneath pollarded willows. Someone produces a sheaf of parchment scraps bearing recipes for infusion of blessed thistle, said to strengthen womb sinews. The women huddle by the fire, trading fears like cards, bridge horrors in distant hamlets, fever deaths after midwives cut cords too short, babies born with calls interpreted as devil masks. Our mother listens, fingers her tightening belly, and wonders how many stories end in miracles that simply never traveled far enough to be disproved. By noon of the second day, the relic church appears, a squat stone building guarded by hawkers flogging saint badges, painted candles, and dubious holy salt scraped from barrels they cart up the road each season. Inside, incense lashes the air thick as wool. A slow queue of pregnant women, some so swollen they look carved from gourds, shuffles toward a glass sarcophagus holding one yellowed knuckle. Monks with eyes rimmed red from smoke chant blessings, but the churn of fear beneath those Gregorian notes is unmistakable. Each woman silently bargains her life for her babies. When our mother finally reaches the relic, she presses 2 fingers against the cold glass. A bell tolls, and a monk murmurs a Latin phrase that might promise peace or might just remind petitioners to move along. She feels nothing, no shiver of grace, no lifting of dread, but her toddler squeals at the echoing acoustics, and the innocent shriek ricochets off vaults like a defiant hymn. People laugh, the monk even smiles. In that echo, she decides the relic's true power is simply forcing strangers to hope together within the same smoky walls. The return trek is harsher. Spring storms slap the caravan sideways, bogging wheels in sludge. One pilgrim slips, seeds a rumor that the saint punishes unbelievers. Another goes into early labor by the roadside. The midwife traveling with them erects a privacy tent from blankets, and for 6 hours the group becomes a movable maternity ward. Our mother agitates to help despite her own pregnancy. She ends up boiling water, fetching rags, and humming the same lullaby that once stitched courage through her first labor. The newborn emerges shriveled yet screaming. Everyone praises son Anne. Privately, the midwife credits the mother's calm voice, steady hands, and a timely gulp of mandrake broth for the delivering woman. They reach home soil exhausted but strangely fortified. The mother's interactions on the road, lighting fires, singing prayers, catching blood, blur the memory of her own agony, replacing it with a sense of communal craft. She realizes midwifery knowledge resembles a traveling hive, each bee carrying pollen of hard-won tricks. One day, her neighbor suggests, she might join that hive formally. No bishop's license required if the village trusts her. Pregnancy weeks roll like a handmill grinding slow and inevitable. She times contractions and dream fragments, recalling the prophecy carved into the village lintel. Work, pray, suffer, rejoice. Midsummer sun flays the fields. She works anyway, waddling between rye rows, tethering her toddler with a cord so the child can chase grasshoppers but not pits. In the afternoon, she rests in shade, rubbing goose grease on cracked nipples, whispering deals with every saint whose name she knows. The belly bumps with life, vigorous, maybe a boy. Villagers guess gender by her cravings, honey-soaked walnuts for aggressiveness. Likely a knight, they say. She smiles, thinking, or another mouth to bargain into adulthood. As harvest nears, the midwife begins visiting nightly, checking the baby's position by lamplight that trembles like a nervous pulse. She prepares a birthing stool repaired with new oak dowels, sprinkles it with juniper ashes, mutters a verse to scare away changelings. This time, the mother's husband chooses not to flee to the alehouse. He builds a second door latch, more secure than the first, so no wandering soul, earthly or otherwise, trespasses mid-contraction. He sharpens every blade. He can't sew or chant, but he can make steel shine like a promise. Labor ambushes at dusk during the St. Bartholomew's Day feast. Musicians squawk out tunes in the manor courtyard, while the mother crouches at home, clutching the edge of the hearth. Flames waltz before her eyes. Each contraction feels like the devil stoking those logs from the inside. The midwife arranges hot stones at her feet to ground her spirit, so it doesn't fly before its time. The toddler, bewildered by his mother's cries, sits with the father near the doorway. The father hums ox songs again, soft and monotonous, nearly drowning out the drumroll of agony from within. Hours stretch elastic. The baby crowns askew and the midwife's calm cracks. She whispers to her apprentice for the special birthing hooks, curved iron whose sight could blanch granite. But courage, amplified by prior experience, buoys the mother. She shifts her hips per the midwife's barked instructions, channels all pain into a guttural roar, and the baby slides free with a gush that smothers embers at the hearth. It is a girl, violet and slippery, cord coiled around her like a serpent loosening its embrace. The midwife works fast, clamps the cord with threads spun from blessed flax, rubs the infant with salt to ward infection, pops a drop of wine on tiny gums to spark the soul's appetite. The baby squeals, indignant at the salted welcome, and everyone exhales a lifetime's worth of dread. The mother collapses back, lips cracked, heart drumming triumphant syncopation. 2 births, 2 survivals. In medieval mathematics, she's beating the odds into pulp. Postpartum protocols repeat, but with refinements gleaned from pilgrimage gossip. Yarrow tea measured in sips, not gulps. No juniper smoke near infant lungs. Amber beads cleaned in vinegar first. The mother records these tweaks in her mind's ledger, ready to dispense them at the next neighbor's labor. Word spreads that she assisted roadside birth. Soon 3 expectant women ask whether she'll attend theirs. The request swells her battered ribs with pride and fear. She agrees, bargaining only for bread loaves and the promise they'll sing lullabies backward when crises hit. Superstition, maybe, but rhythm steadies panic better than silence. Summer sags into plague rumors again. Fleas hitch rides on traders, black bumps bloom on distant skin. At the manor gate, guards demand travelers strip outer garments for burning, but microbes ignore torches. Our village braces with prayer parades. Children bang pots to terrify the pestilence. The mother, infant strapped to chest, toddler at heel, joins the clamor. Yet quietly she boils vinegar and lavender for wiping door handles, a trick a Moorish merchant boasted about before coughing blood into his beard. Some scoff at her fuss. She continues regardless, because motherhood breeds heresy against complacency. Plague strikes 3 villages away, but dwindles at the forest line. Whether by luck, quarantine, or banging pots, no one knows. Life lurches back to mundane perils. A sow crushes a neighbor boy. Hail flattens oats. The Lord raises rent. Still, laughter resurfaces at evenings, when mothers gather to swap childbirth sagas like minstrels weave epics, each one grander and gorier than the last. Our heroine learns to dramatize chord nods, breach fiddling in saintly interventions with flair that would earn applause in any mead hall. Storytelling, she realizes, is anesthesia for the memory. Rehearsed terror loses its barbs, morphing into badges. Years wheel forth. She delivers 2 more babies for neighbors, each time applying incremental knowledge, scalded linens, clean nails, hawthorn twig pessaries to slow bleeding. She grows fluent in screams and silences, reading when a contraction hides disaster behind grit teeth. The bishop's men do arrive one autumn, parchment rolls in hand, interrogating unauthorized midwives. She meets their smug Latin with steel gaze, recites the 10 Commandments, offers them stale beer, and recommends they ask the Virgin Mary why she allowed women to bleed and men to faint at the sight. They leave, muttering about uppity Eve's daughters, and stamp licenses elsewhere. Her own children sprout like thistles. The boy trails behind his father, practicing calf roping with bits of twine. The girl toddles after, cheeks plum red, brandishing a wooden spoon as though to stir destiny. Each birthday is a whispered victory lap. She counts small graves on the hill and whispers thanks for her empty plots. In stolen quiet, usually dawn when roosters rehearse sermons, she imagines futures, children becoming apprentices, maybe scribes if monasteries need bright eyes. Maybe her daughter follows her path, hands slippery with new lives' beginnings. A decade passes, then another. The mother's womb finally rests, cycles ebbing into silence like a tide that decided to spare the shore further erosion. Gray threads silver her braids, joints creak protest, but her reputation gleams. When labor pains echo over fields, someone fetches her, not the bishop-licensed strangers. She carries the relic of St. Anne's badge on a cord as both joke and talisman. Tin rubbed smooth by years of clutching. She tells each panting woman the secret she learned leaning over her own hearthfire, that survival is half technique, half raw cussed will, and both can be taught. One final winter, she assists a birth so quiet she fears the mother's thin breath will snap. Snow muffles screams, frost paints the walls white as chapel veils. The baby emerges still, umbilicus wound tight. The grandmother weeps, already charting another grave. But the seasoned midwife, our once terrified girl turned matron, sucks mucus from tiny nostrils, massages minuscule chest, mutters St. Margaret's prayer sideways through clenched jaw, and flicks souls until a wet sob bursts forth, shocking silence into song. In that moment she feels time collapse, every labor she's seen threading into one tapestry whose pattern is stubborn, luminous life. She walks home through snow that night, moon burning like a cold penny overhead. Her cottage, roof sagging yet loyal, greets her with ember glow. Inside, her grown children snore, one bent over a tally slate, the other on a straw mat, dreaming of next market day. She lets herself exhale decades of pent-up dread. A finch flutters in the rafters, shaken from sleep, and she marvels how even fragile birds endure these stone-clad centuries. She settles on a stool, the same one where her first labor began. Fingers trace the grain worn smooth by gripping terror long past. She whispers gratitude to saints and spirits, to moss diapers and yarrow tea, to women's gossip networks resilient as oak roots. She acknowledges the graves too, because each headstone taught her where danger hides. She smiles, not wide, dental care still medieval, but deep. Hope, she knows now, is not the absence of fear. It's the habit of walking through fear while carrying salt, prayers, and a knife small enough to hide in a bodice. Outside, dawn yawns pink over frost. Soon another generation will need lullabies, poultices, and someone to stand unflinching between pain and life. She adjusts her shawl, stands, and throws a fresh log on the coals. Sparks leap, ancestors' whispers riding their glow. The Middle Ages roll on, relentless, but so does she, midwife to the centuries, proof that in a world designed to break bodies, women learn to solder souls back together with nothing but herbs, courage, and stories that refuse to die. 10 seconds. Picture a rattling wagon stuffed with pepper sacks worth more than your hometown, the stench of camel sweat, and a horizon crawling with bandits who consider human ribs handy toothpicks. 5 more seconds. Imagine plague rats tap dancing under the floorboards and a customs official sharpening quills the way executioners hone axes. Welcome to 14th century trade, where every mile is a coin toss and the house always cheats. The sun isn't up yet, but Genoa's docks are already roaring like a broke choir. Hawkers bellowing, gulls screeching, sailors cursing in dialects that sound like gargling gravel. You shoulder your ledger, pray the ink hasn't leaked again, and force your way through crates of alum, bales of wool, and one terrifying cage containing something that whistles when angered. Your partner Nicolo swears it's a newfangled songbird from Cyprus. It has teeth. You choose not to argue. Arguments cost time, and time is money, and money is the only saint every merchant truly worships. Niccolò negotiated passage on a Venetian round ship, a decision equal parts genius and felony. Genoese law calls that treason, but the Venetians' freight rate undercut local captains by 1/3. Commerce, like plague, respects no borders. You cross the gangplank, past a sailor who spits to port for good luck, past another who taps each toenail for the same reason. Superstition is mandatory. The sea eats logic for breakfast. Below deck, pepper barrels tower in precarious pyramids. Each barrel is prime ransom material. A pound in Bruges fetches enough to buy a town. To secure them, sailors hammer iron nails the size of thumbs into beams that look older than sin. You inhale the black, sneeze-inducing sting of crushed peppercorns, and remember, the contract clause. Cargo lost to acts of God absolves the shipmaster. You silently request that God find other hobbies for the next fortnight. The harbor fades. The Tyrrhenian Sea opens like a giant jug of blue-gray wine gone sour. The crew chants filthy ditties about concubines and codfish while you wrestle with nausea. Venetian galleys at least have rowers and can outrun storms. This fat-bellied round ship drifts like a drunk monk. 4 days out, clouds gather like debt collectors. In the galley kitchen, 2 planks and a cauldron, you barter for lemon slices to ward off scurvy that hasn't even started. Prevention is cheap, cure bankrupts. Night falls, black as a banker's soul. The helmsman swears by star charts, but the moon hides and the wind tugs at rigging like a toddler on mother's apron. You're halfway through a prayer to whatever saint covers inexperienced merchants when the lookout screams. Pirates. No romance here, just a lean galley with lateen sails cut to slice wind like knives, and a prow that looks eager for dental work involving your hull. The captain rings a bell. Sailors scramble like ants dumped from a jar. You clutch a short sword Niccolò insisted you buy. You've practiced exactly twice, once sober, once drunk, and both times ended with you slicing air like bad cheese. From the forecastle, the pirate ship appears skeletal, ribs of hull twisting through spray. Then a crossbow bolt thunks into the mast, quarrel quivering like a sarcastic sigh. Fate intervenes. Wind shifts, sails snap full, and the round ship lurches ahead at a speed it has no right achieving. Pirates curse, but they won't row themselves into oblivion chasing a tub. Minutes stretch, distance widens, tension unknots by painful inches. Relief tastes like brine and cold sweat. You vow to pour a libation at the next shrine, maybe 2 if your purse hasn't been stolen by then. 4 dawns later, Alexandria's lighthouse appears, a hazy tooth biting the horizon. The The harbor is a bloom of lateen sails, merchant hulks, and war galleys flashing Mamluk banners. Dhow skippers shout prices for unloading, each quote higher than the last. Bureaucracy greets you in the form of customs scribes who demand scrolls, stamps, signatures, and bribes disguised as inspection fees. One clerk eyes the pepper like a starving wolf, pats his fan of ink-stained palms, and slides your permit across the table only when it's heavy enough to satisfy his definition of piety. Cargo transfers to camelbacks in the shadow of minarets. Alexandria smells of salt, dung, and spices that fight for nasal supremacy. Cinnamon, cumin, and something sour that might be sweat or commerce or both. Niccolo hires a caravan master with a face creased deeper than desert wadis. The man's name is Yusuf, though everyone calls him Al-Kalb, the dog, because he guards goods like a kennel full of pups. He inventories your pepper, then adds escort fee columns to your ledger in script sharp enough to draw blood. You argue until he explains caravan math. The desert swallows those who underpay. The caravan sets off at dawn under skies scrubbed clean of clouds. Camels groan like rusty gate hinges, merchants shout final bargains with money changers, beggars chant blessings laced with curses if coins don't clink. You ride a sway-backed beast named Zara, who hates your scent and your lineage, and communicates this through periodic attempts to detach you from existence. Yusuf assures you Zara is merely testing dominance. You suspect she's composing your eulogy. First, miles roll smooth over packed sand, but desert heat soon climbs like a thief up the back of your neck. Water rations become sacred arithmetic. Yusuf's rule, 1 skin per man per day, half for camels, none for fools. He identifies fools by who complains first. You bite your tongue, swallow dust, and listen to the caravan's soundtrack. Leather creaking, camel complaints, and the distant flute of a scout, perched on a dune like a crow scanning for carrion. Bandit tales circulate nightly around brushwood fires inside caravanserai courtyards. One story, a raider nicknamed Scorpion of the Sands who rides a white stallion and collects ears as tax. Another, jinn disguised as lost pilgrims who ask for water, then vanish with entire baggage trains. Yusuf dismisses half the tales but doubles sentry watches anyway. You try to sleep on a mat that feels like woven regrets, lulled by snores and farting camels and the uneasy rasp of steel on whetstones. Mid-journey, sandstorms ambush without warning. The sky transforms into a swirling ochre wall. Wind slaps your cheeks raw, sand infiltrates every crease of cloth and skin, peppering eyelids until tears carve muddy tracks. Yusuf barks orders to kneel camels, cover noses with scarves, recite verses if you know any. You mutter ledger entries instead, math is your prayer. When the storm passes, your caravan emerges half buried, pepper sacks crusted in grit. You decide sand must be the desert's way of autographing. Travel resumes, slower now. Water skins deflate, tongues swell, lips split. Day's heat cooks logic, night's chill gnaws bones. Some merchants suck on date pits to trick spit glands. Niccolo develops a cough that echoes off dunes. You offer him a scrap of candied ginger. He offers thanks in a voice like gravel sliding downhill. Both of you avoid mentioning plague rumors out of Venice. Sickness thrives on spoken invitations. After 9 days jeweled under merciless sun, the caravan limps into Damascus, the perfumed city, though right now it smells mostly of tanners' pits and overripe figs. You trade pepper kernels for silver dirhams so pure they ring like crystal tears. A money changer flicks 1 coin into the air, bites it, nods. Transactions here require theatrics. Without drama, value feels suspect. In the souk, spices tower in rainbow mounds, and silk bolts flutter like captured sunsets. You buy silk scraps dyed Tyrian purple as samples for European clients who worship rare colors more devoutly than saints. Niccolo haggles over lapis lazuli chips from Badakhshan, pigment for painters whose patrons demand Madonna, robes the shade of midnight prayers. Every purchase multiplies risk. Each gem, spice, or cloth adds weight and invites thieves with economic acumen. 2 nights in Damascus underscore caravan rules. Never sleep in the same inn twice. Never discuss route plans where walls can listen. And never underestimate local politics. The Mamluk Sultan's tax collectors swoop in like hungry hawks, demanding transit fees indexed to your visible anxiety. You pay in coin and in humiliation. Niccolo mutters that trade is just legal robbery. You remind him robbery usually skips the paperwork. Small blessings. Leaving Damascus, the road forks east toward Baghdad, but rumors of Mongol raids make Yusuf reconsider. Instead, he opts north toward Aleppo, skirting battle zones at the cost of extra days. Detours in trade are like detours in life. You pray the extended suffering pays dividends. Aleppo's citadel rises like a giant's fist, stone knuckles bruised by centuries of siege. Within its walls, caravan brokers feast on information. Who sells cheap, who buys desperate, which gate guards accept bribes in Armenian silver versus Georgian wine. You secure warehouse space, a mud brick rectangle with a door that looks surprised it's still hanging. Guards, two Turkmen cousins with scimitars and suspiciously white teeth, agree to watch your goods for a fee that stings less than losing everything. You seal pepper barrels with wax impressed by Niccolo's signet, a griffin clutching a coin. Whether illiterate thieves respect heraldry is questionable, but it makes you feel one layer safer. Aleppo nights simmer with card games, storytellers, and diseases negotiating entry. You sample lamb skewers spiced with sumac so tart your jaw squeaks. Entertainment is a man swallowing swords while reciting Persian poetry, followed by a dancer who balances brass trays on her head, elbows, and improbable moral high ground. You applaud, tip a copper, then slip away to scribble profit projections under a sputtering oil lamp, mental abacus clicking louder than drums. Next morning, a messenger flings news like stones. The bridge over the Euphrates collapsed under last week's flood. Traders must now detour south to cross at a ford, controlled by Kurdish bandits wearing tax collector smiles. Yusuf calculates provisions and sighs the way men do when fate raises its middle finger. You purchase additional water skins, dried apricots, and an amulet carved with an eye. Anti-evil insurance endorsed by a jovial Coptic craftsman who swears his cousin outran a plague cart thanks to the same talisman. Odds seem implausible, but at this point a carved eye feels statistically as sound as anything. Caravan sets out again through steppe that undulates like a sea frozen in mid-whitecap. Grass whispers under hooves. Distant volcano shapes loom, haze blurred. Tooth-bird cage now emits occasional snarls. Niccolo is certain a nightingale lives inside, though you've seen nightingales and they rarely bear fangs. You ponder releasing the creature, but picture it eating both profit margin and perhaps your face. Better the devil you know cage than roaming payroll. Late afternoon, pulsing hooves approach, a patrol bearing the emblem of local emir. They request inspection, their method of greeting shining scimitars and wearing expressions that say, "Surprise us at your peril." Yusuf presents papers wax-sealed by Damascus officials. The leader squints, picks his teeth with the document's corner, and declares it satisfyingly official, for a fee. You pay after brief haggling. Bribes are like toll bridges nobody bothers building. As patrol rides off, Niccolo tallies dwindling coin, predicts bankruptcy by Mosul. You remind him Pepper's resale will triple at least. He reminds you that's assuming you live. You settle debate by praising the merits of assuming nothing except more bad weather. Campfire that night finds merchants trading home cures. Swallow 2 cloves daily to repel fevers. Tie wormwood to ankles against snakebite. Never eat figs after sunset or your bowels will declare civil war. You jot each tip in margins of your ledger. A tool must track both coin and myth. Sometimes myth pays interest. A shooting star scars the sky. Camel drivers gasp, a sign of souls escaping. A Persian silk master whispers the star could be Tamerlane's arrow lighting future battlefields. You watch the ember tail dissolve and wonder which of you it predicted. Morning drips cold. Your breath ghosts. Camels complain in bass notes. Caravan moves like an arthritic centipede, kicking up dust devils that dance then collapse. An hour in, wheel squeals, axle crack. You dismount, examine splintered wood. Spare wheel? Yusuf shakes his head. Improvisation time. Strip lumber from an abandoned yurt skeleton nearby. Lash it with camel hide thongs. Pray tensile strength holds. Repair steals daylight. Schedule bleeds. While working, you glimpse movement on a distant ridge. 3 riders, silhouettes etched black. Bandits or scouts? Yusuf plants extra guards front and rear, arrow knock ready. Riders shadow caravan from horizon, neither closing nor retreating. Suspense becomes a metallic taste. By twilight they vanish, perhaps satisfied by your vigilance or enticed elsewhere. You wait for attack all night, none comes. Fear, it seems, is a freelance tax. Aleppo to Mosul leg drags 8 weary days. Your dreams blur into grainy montages, pepper barrels toppling, sand-swallowing coins, plague-flecked rats wearing pirate hats. You wake nightly, heart-hammering ledger columns against ribcage. At journey's midpoint, a merchant from Tabriz quizzes you on European wool markets. You query him on Chinese porcelain glazes. Information trades faster than goods, smuggle it past borders, and nobody collects tariffs. Finally, the walls of Mosul rise, their bastions scorched by histories of siege. You exhale, the halfway mark of your greater odyssey. Pepper barrels intact, Niccolo alive though coughing like a dying bellows, toothbird still snarling. Profits remain theoretical, but potential drips like honey you haven't tasted yet. You pay Yusuf for safe conduct thus far, secure storage in a khan whose owner boasts he once hosted Marco Polo's uncle. Possibly true, possibly marketing. Either way, the courtyard reeks of stable muck and opportunity, authentic trade fragrance. Exhausted, you recline on a woven mat, stare at ceiling beams crawling with lizards. Tomorrow, you'll negotiate river barges down the Tigris, temple taxes, and blood price rates with Kurdish toll wardens. But tonight, desert wind sneaks through slats, pepper dust tingles your nostrils, and you grin. Idiot grin of a merchant who's survived enough perils to forget the rest still waiting. Fortune favors fools. In the 14th century, that makes you practically immortal. Dawn in Mosul slithers up the Tigris like a reluctant serpent, dragging bluish fog that smells of mud, river rot, and last night's cooking oil. You wake to a chorus of squabbling geese, notice the toothbird cage hanging lopsided from a beam, and briefly consider smashing it for peace of mind. Instead, you ration courage in the form of stale dates, splash your face with water suspiciously the color of pewter, and join Niccolo in the Khan courtyard. He's rubbing lamp black under his eyes, claims merchants who look half-possessed attract fewer pickpockets. Judging by the coin belt he still owns, his thesis holds some weight. Today's problem list begins with barges. River pilots draped in indigo robes and permanent scowls demand triple the usual fare for hauling pepper barrels downstream. They cite swollen currents and mermaid taxes, though you suspect mermaids get none of the proceeds. Your counteroffer triggers a hissing fit of arithmetic where every scribble adds another invisible surcharge. Bridge maintenance or replacement, personal angst. Eventually you concede enough silver dirhams to make them grin like cats swallowing singing crickets. Pepper barrels are rolled down planks and lashed onto reed rafts, topped by patched sailcloth. Crew members, barefoot boys who look 12 but curse like 80, poise poles to shove off. The river takes hold, current muscular and impatient, shunting the convoy south. Mosul's fortifications shrink behind you, stone melting into mirage. Ahead lies a snaking liquid road, rumored to carry ghosts. Drowned tax collectors said to appear on moonless nights, still clutching ledgers heavy with unpaid sins. Day 1 glides uneventfully, if you ignore mosquitoes humming plague lullabies. Day 2 opens with an encounter, a tangle of wrecked boats marooned against a sandbar, hulls full of arrows. Survivors squat on shore picking splinters, eyes swivel as your flotilla coasts past. They shout warnings in Kurdish. River bandits operate from poplar groves downstream, prefer night attacks, wield Greek fire in clay pots. Your pilot pretends deafness but orders oil poured on deck planks to douse sparks quickly. Niccolo fingers his short sword as though apology might make it sharper. Night settles like wet felt. The moon limps behind ragged clouds, illumination poor enough for murder. You and Niccolo take turns on watch, gripping oil lamps whose flames jitter more than your nerves. Hours crawl, silence cracked only by frogs debating theology. Then, whistle of something slicing air. Clay jar bursts on the next barge, spewing burning tar across canvas. Screams ricochet, poles flail. Someone flips into the river, extinguished with a hiss. Your pilot howls orders, drop sail, drift stern. First, to narrow the target, you spy shapes among poplars, shadows hurling more jars. You fumble for the crossbow bolted beside pepper barrels, insurance you never practiced with. You crank, load, aim vaguely at movement, squeeze trigger. The bolt sails into darkness, your courage along with it. Seconds later, a shriek suggests improbable success. Bandits retreat, perhaps superstitious about unlucky shots. Fires are slapped out with wet blankets. Damage? 2 scorched sacks, 1 pilot's eyebrow missing, 1 barrel unfortunately converted into pepper-flavored charcoal. Losses tallied, bribes to river gods promised. The convoy moseys onward under a sky suddenly crowded with suspiciously attentive stars. Baghdad's approach feels like gliding into a furnace lined with gold leaf. Date palms bow over embankments, minarets spear sky, markets spill color and cacophony onto quays. You pay harbor fees plus a rat inspection charge, even though inspectors seem more interested in your purse than rodents. Pepper barrels wheel into a vaulted warehouse redolent of frankincense and camel urine. Warehouse registry scribes emboss your name in ledgers wider than tombstones, then charge for the ink used to do so. Baghdad is equal parts paradise and purgatory. Scholars in silk turbans debate Aristotle beneath arches while beggars chase flies with the same determination crusaders chase Jerusalem. You lose half a day in the book bazaar, purchasing a Persian manual on antidotes for poisons, melancholies, and matters of the spleen. Niccolo laughs until you remind him of his cough. He buys silk scarves dyed cobalt, claims scarcity in Italy will triple their price. You note they also hide plague buboes nicely, should that become a trend. Securing onward passage involves diplomacy, graft, and flattery thick enough to grease camels. Eastward options, join a Persian silk convoy bound for Tabriz, and onward to the Caspian. Gamble on a solo ride across Khorasan deserts, or charter spots with a Mongol-protected trade embassy returning to Samarkand. Mongol passports, paisi, are coveted, bronze tablets engraved with the Great Khan's authority, granting bearers free horses at relay stations. You bribe a bureaucrat who bribes another who owes favors to a third, and by sunset you hold 2 paisi shimmering like dragon scales. You pay thrice their weight in silver plus 1 pepper sample to sweeten destiny. The embassy caravan gathers outside Baghdad's northern gate. An eclectic menagerie, Persian astronomers mapping stars, Armenian jewelers guarding pouches like newborns, Chinese monks hauling crates of paper and portable gongs, plus 30 Mongol lancers whose mere yawn looks like the start of a conquest. Their banners depict snarling wolves. Their humor leans toward throat-slitting jokes delivered in deadpan. Caravan leader is Bayan, a Silk Road veteran who counts his scars like prayer beads. He inspects your paisi, nods once, and assigns you to Wagon 7, pulled by oxen with the temperament of disgruntled magistrates. The road to Hamadan snakes through foothills dotted with ruins groaning under memories of Genghis Khan. Spring rains turn pathways into clay pudding. Wheels churn, oxen belch steam. Bayan refuses delays. He measures progress in arrow flights, not leagues. When axles snap, carpenters race clouds to fit replacements. Food ration, flatbread, dried apricots, fermented mare's milk that tastes like a goat's revenge. You learn to swallow without tasting. Hamadan's chill nights host stories as thick as blankets. A Uyghur merchant recounts losing cargo to a sand world that howled verses from the Quran. A Syrian glassblower claims he visited a city made entirely of mirrors, where spirits barter reflections. Bayan tops all tales. He once guided a caravan through snow so deep that camels walked over village rooftops, and locals opened chimneys to sell soup. Fact or fable, the point is clear. The road is chaos wearing geography as disguise. From Hamadan, the caravan ascends to snow-capped Zagros passes. Cold slices lungs. Pepper sacks stiffen like bricks. Toothbird falls silent, perhaps frozen or plotting. Mountain tribes demand passage tolls, carpets, iron tools, and occasionally a performance. Bayan hands over 2 barrels of indigo dye and instructs Niccolo to juggle copper cups while you recite a love poem in bad Arabic. The tribesmen guffaw, wave you through, and keep the cups. Niccolo hasn't juggled since childhood. He now qualifies as either a diplomat or a miracle. Descending onto plateau, the caravan merges with an eastbound silk convoy. Combined, you number more than 200 souls, not counting pack animals and lice. Safety in numbers shifts predator math. Bandits now need armies. Nevertheless, buy-in posts scouts. Mongol law punishes negligence with flogging or demotion to dung shovel. You notice quivers never leave archers' backs even when they sleep. You adopt habit of resting with boots on, dagger under pillow. Tabriz rises from dust haze, a hub where gossip travels faster than caravans. Markets brim with Kashmiri shawls, Venetian glass, smuggled back east after traveling west. Trade is a boomerang, and Tubers the vendor swears cure impotence. You warehouse pepper, convert some to local coin, a hammered silver called dinar, because bribes prefer local dialects. Niccolo brokers deals for indigo, exchanging 3 bolts for a map showing fresh wells along the next route. Information costs less than funerals. While awaiting caravan reassembly, you witness Mongol justice. 2 thieves tied to horsetails, dragged until confession becomes pulp. Lesson etched into dirt. The Silk Road tolerates commerce, not freelancing thievery. You wonder if European kings might adopt such efficiency. Then remember, they prefer torture that doubles as public entertainment and church fundraiser. Tabriz to Sultania stretch is straightforward, if your definition involves flash floods, locust swarms, and cordial encounters with wolf packs. Buy-in schedules night marches under full moon. Wolves dislike crowds and torches. He times rest stops at caravanserais, fortified inns positioned like beads on a prayer string. Each offers bread, fodder, baths of sorts, and rumors. One keeper insists Black Death resurfaced near Kaffa. Another says the Pope plans crusade number, who even counts. Geopolitics is background noise to merchants. Disease rumors, however, slice like razors. Niccolo's cough lingers. You buy dried myrrh to burn under his bunk, hoping demons dislike the scent as much as you do. Crossing Dasht-e-Kavir, Iran's Great Salt Desert, brings fresh comedy. Wagon wheels sink into crust that looks solid until stepped upon, then devours boots. Sun reflection blinds, tongues swell. Buy-in orders everyone to smear camel grease on faces. You comply, smelling like a tallow candle set on fire, then doused in regret. At midday break, a gelded camel escapes, driven mad by mirage. It sprints until collapsing, salt caking its nostrils. Buy-in orders meat carved, cannot waste protein. Salt roasted camel. Exotic cuisine no cookbook will memorialize. Parched beyond politeness, you ration water like sacrament. One trader dies of heat stroke. His companions barter half his silk for extra skins before burial. Business continues even when blood has barely cooled. 14th century empathy has transaction fees. Nights, the desert flips from oven to freezer. You wrap in felts that smell of goat dreams. Watch stars swarm. Niccolo recounts celestial myths. Those twinkling clusters? Caravanners who died lost and now guide survivors. You prefer to think they're price indicators, each star a fluctuating market waiting to be cornered. At the oasis of Sabzavar, life returns in the form of palm shade and scorpions the size of belt buckles. Scouts report Mongol outposts ahead distributing fresh horses. You surrender ox wagon for a string of Bactrian camels. These shaggy beasts ride smoother and spit more accurately. Toothbird, thawed now, shrieks grievances. A Mongol archer offers to silence it permanently for a copper. You decline. Superstition insists caged creature absorbs bad luck, like a sponge you dare not wring. Caravan skirts Mashhad, holy city where dervishes whirl so fervently candles snuff from shock. Pilgrims swell roads, buying pepper in pinches priced like silver dust. You sell a barrel in secret, triple rate, hush tongue with a gratuity. Niccolo tallies coins, grins until cough bends him double. Local healer prescribes ground saffron and goat milk, charges as though each strand were spun from angel hair. You pay? Saffron tastes like sweet hay and hope. Approaching Herat, banners of the Khartid dynasty flutter atop mud brick battlements. City gates swallow your convoy, disgorging into bazaars rich with turquoise tiles and poorer with sanitary scents. You rent stall space, display pepper under silk cloth, drum up customers by touting its abilities, preserves meat, masks rot, impresses dinner guests, repels demons with sneezes. Sales brisk until a rival merchant accuses you of diluting product with black grit. You challenge him to taste test. He sneezes 3 times, eyes watering. Crowd laughs. Reputation salvaged. You buy him wine to prove lack of ill will. Commerce thrives on public feuds ending in private toasts. Nicolo's cough subsides. Either saffron worked or new city air replaced lung fungus. He purchases Lapa's cabochon, citing Florentine painters' hunger for ultramarine blue. You secure cotton bolts, lighter than wool, but strong enough to sail across more tax checkpoints. Your ledger balloons like a monk after Lent. Next leg, the famed Khyber Pass, gateway into the Indian subcontinent. Caravan splits, half north toward Samarkand, half south toward Delhi. You face choice, lucrative spice settlements in India, or silk-rich oasis towns toward China. Nicolo argues India. Pepper sells, sure, but Indian indigo and diamonds eclipse it. You weigh risk. Khyber swarms with Pashtun brigands known for hospitality thin as parchment. Bayan heads Samarkand. Without his Mongols, India means new escorts, fresh bribes, unfamiliar gods. After a night of date wine and profit predictions, you choose north. Nicolo groans, then shrugs. Partnership is marriage without the dowry. Bayan nods approval. Samarkand caravan departs in 2 dawns. You sell remaining pepper for bolts of Chinese silk acquired from southern traders, barter to appease Mongol customs. Toothbird cage you gift to a child beggar who calls it a dragon. Relief floods as screeching recedes, though you feel naked, as if fortune's sponge now leaks. Route from Herat to Merv sprawls over steppes veined with rivers that vanish come summer. Spring still fattens grass. Herds of wild horses gallop free, manes rippling like banners of liberty unavailable to traveling merchants. Bayan pushes pace, 25 miles daily. Paisi unlocking relay stations stocked with remounts. You swap camels for lean step ponies that glide like wind, except when they bite. Nicolo rides poorly. Every gallop leaves him listing like a punctured wine jug. You reassure him bruises build character. He suggests ledger entries for medical expenses. Evenings, smoke from yurts curls into apricot sunsets. Mongol hosts greet you with erig, fermented milk again, this time equine rather than bovine. You pretend enjoyment, throat clenching as bubbles fight exit strategy. Bayan toasts to safe passage. You toast to compound interest. Along Amu Darya River, tragedy ambushes quietly. Dysentery slithers through camp. 2 grooms collapse. Lips crack darker than fortune's humor. Bayan enforces boil water edict, rare foresight. You trade more saffron for dried pomegranate. Brew tart infusion set to steady guts. Nicolo avoids infection. Your own bowels writhe but remain loyal after a night of negotiation with unseen gods. At last, Samarkand's turquoise domes pierce horizon like promises redeemed. Walls of baked brick shimmer under noon sun. Marketplaces sing polyglot symphonies, Persian bargains, Turkic insults, Chinese boasts. Timur himself hasn't risen yet, but the city already thrones over Central Asia's trade lattice. Caravan enters through Registan Gate. Clerks tally goods. Your Paisi earns respectful bows. Bayan's contract ends. He invites you to feast on roast lamb and kumis, then vanishes to recruit new escorts eastward toward Cathay. You stand in Samarkand's bazaar, ledger heavy with gains, mind heavier with next moves. China's silk, India's gems, Russia's furs, arteries converge here. Choices bloom like bazaar carpets. Whichever you walk, some snake will strike, some angel may sing. Nicolo coughs once, clears throat, asks, "So, partner, do we chase porcelain dragons or diamond demons?" You grin, feeling older, saltier, but undeniably richer in scars and stories. The road didn't kill you, yet. Therefore, by medieval logic, it owes you interest. You snap the ledger shut, tilt face to blistering sun, and answer with a merchant's eternal creed. Whichever route looks impossible, because impossible pays best. And just like that, the next perilous chapter rolls across the horizon, jangling its pockets full of danger, disease, and absurdly inflated profit margins, exactly the kind of invitation a 14th century fool cannot refuse. Samarkand devours gold and spits out rumors faster than any city you have ever known. So naturally you spend your first week here bleeding silver dirhams into every open palm. The money changer who swaps your Baghdad dinars for UN minted paper notes does so with the dainty sneer of a man who knows inflation better than his children's birthdays. The innkeeper doubles his rates the moment he notices your Mongol paisi hanging from its leather cord, a blinding badge of privilege that also screams, "Overcharge me, I'm desperate." Meanwhile, Niccolo gambles half a night away on a dice game called Thief's Bones, wins a bolt of Chinese satin, then immediately loses it to a Persian scholar in exchange for a prayer against plague. Plague prevention by textile barter may be nonsense, but at least an invisible prayer can't rot in a storeroom. Everywhere, silk caravans hiss through gates under banners stitched with dragons, rams, and occasionally a manticore or two, marketing logos centuries ahead of their time. Merchants hawk bottles of rosewater, turquoise beads the size of quail eggs, and painted miniatures featuring warriors so spectacularly mustachioed they could sweep both ends of the Great Wall simultaneously. You try to focus on your pepper balance sheet, but Samarkand's call is irresistible. You binge on saffron rice, pomegranate stew, and sweet melon so fresh it tastes like the desert's apology for everything else it has put you through. The resulting gastronomic upheaval ensures you are never more than 5 paces from an outhouse, an experience reminiscent of sailing through a storm, except the waves are entirely internal. Business, however, demands momentum. Word spreads of a diplomatic caravan riding all the way to Khanbalik, Marco Polo's famous Sanadu, jewel of the yuan. Imperial envoys will escort tribute giraffes from Bengal, Persian astronomers, and wagon loads of raw jade. The catch: they depart in 3 days, travel under imperial timetable, meaning no pity for stragglers, and accept only traders whose cargo flatters the Great Khan's palate. Pepper still counts as edible flattery, but your supply is dwindling, so you bring samples of Samarkand's famed paper, smooth, strong, and allegedly capable of withstanding 8 rewrites of a tax ledger without smearing. Bureaucrats everywhere lust for such parchment the way crusaders lust for absolution. The envoy captain is a Mongol named Orug, whose presence feels like standing next to a war drum moments before the strike. He scans each applicant with a stare that might etch stone tablets and tells you bluntly that the road to Khanbalik crosses mountain passes where even mountain goats hire Sherpas, then plunges into the Gobi Desert, where sandstorms peel flesh from men and memory from horses. He requires a camel levy, 1 fresh beast per trader to replace inevitable casualties. You haggle, he frowns, and you pay, because arguing with a man who calls sandstorms flesh peelers seems a poor life choice. Caravan assembly at dawn reveals over 200 souls, Uyghur scribes, Nestorian priests hauling relic boxes, a troupe of Georgian acrobats with bodies tattooed in swirling script, and a small detachment of Chinese engineers tasked with demonstrating gunpowder rockets at every major garrison. Their wagon leaks charcoal dust and the distinct scent of trouble. Niccolo eyes their crates the way cats eye dangling yarn. You remind him that explosions rarely boost profit margins unless you sell coffins. Departure feels less like travel and more like being swallowed by the steppe. Samarkand's turquoise domes shrink behind dust devils. Ahead sprawls a grassland ocean broken only by gyra camps and the occasional stone turtle marker guarding graves of long-deceased khans. Days slide into a rhythm of hoofbeats, distant thunder, and tea so salty it tastes like someone brewed seawater through mutton. At night, the engineers test a rocket. It whips skyward, bursts in green fire, and spooks every horse within a mile. Orug laughs until an arrow thuds into the sand at his feet, warning shot from unseen watchers who prefer the sky remain quiet. Rocket demonstrations are cancelled pending further diplomatic sensitivity. Within a week, you learn why steppe travelers measure distance in dead horses. One of Orug's spare mounts tangles a leg in gopher holes, snaps bone, and must be mercy-bladed. The carcass becomes communal stew, equal parts reverence and zero-waste policy. You chew gamey shoulder strip while listening to a Buryat scout enumerate what else can go wrong before breakfast. Wolf packs, river ice melt, lightning storms that ignite grass like kindling. Niccolo swallows hard, cough still ghosting his lungs, and privately confesses that he occasionally dreams of Genoa's harbor stench with yearning nostalgia. By the time the caravan reaches the Tian Shan foothills, every night fires blaze brighter to ward off leopards that patrol tree lines. Guides insist clanging copper pans repels big cats. Acrobats volunteer musical accompaniment, turning each campsite into impromptu percussion concert, punctuated by terrified braying. But even noise can't save a trailer ox one moonless evening when it slips from a ridge path and plummets into darkness, snapping rope lines that nearly drag 3 more beasts after it. You peer over the edge at morning light and glimpse shattered barrels of tribute sulfur, yellow dust scattered like demonic pollen over rocks below. Orog labels it a modest loss, and orders pace increased. Schedules are divine commandments. The high pass, iron gate of Zatisu, approaches, a narrow defile gouged between cliffs that meet overhead like giant shaking hands. Snow clings to ledges even in summer, and in wind whistles through gaps with the voice of everything you ever feared as a child. The path bottles the caravan single file. Halfway through, a boulder, loosened by frost, crashes onto the lead wagon, splintering axle and pinning an unfortunate scribe beneath parchment crates. His screams echo until Orug's dagger stills them. Mercy in the mountains comes fast and cold. A quick burial beneath cairn stones follows, accompanied by a priest's chant about the road being the greatest monastery of all. No walls, no doors, only inevitable vows. Descending into the Zungarian basin brings heat that feels like being slipped into a baker's oven. Flies form black halos around camel dung. Water skins evaporate visibly. Caravan etiquette shifts. Greetings shorten. Jokes dry up. Survival throttles conversation. The Georgian acrobats, once flamboyant, resort to limping beside wagons, juggling energy only when commanders watch. Nights bring relief, but also dread. Jackals howl like drunks reciting poetry. You trade a silk scarf for a gourd of kumis just to secure deeper sleep, but wake with head hammering like a loon. Hangovers, you discover, do not respect the horizon. At Lake Boston, a vast mirror ringed by reeds, the caravan pauses for 3 blessed days to rest beasts and boil lice-ridden clothing. You and Nicolo scrub pepper dust from pores, marvel at water that doesn't taste of goats. Fishermen sell carp roasted with wild onions, luxury measured in grease dribbling down chins. You repair ledgers, converting Samarkand gains into speculative Chinese market values. Paper money, you note, weighs nothing but melts in rain and devalues when emperors sneeze. Pepper at least holds scent. Nicolo reminds you Chinese porcelain fetches 8 times its price in Venice. You remind him porcelain shatters like gamblers' promises. Compromise. Invest in lacquerware, lighter than pottery, harder to break, flashy enough for Italian dukes who judge worth by how well something reflects their face. On departure morning, Orug announces plague quarantine measures. Anyone coughing blood rides in the tail column, isolated between 2 torch-bearing guards at night. The memory of Genoa's quarantine galleys chills your blood. Nicolo's lingering cough becomes object of communal scrutiny. You dose him with clove tea steeped in suspect alcohol until he reeks like a medieval apothecary fire. Miraculously, or by sheer terror, his throat clears. The Gobi greets travelers with a horizon so flat it feels like living on a map. Sand grains carry heat that can blister through shoe soles. Midday shadows vanish, removing proof of existence. Camels sink ankle-deep in dunes and protest with profanity you're sure transcends language. Water becomes currency dwarfed only by air. Guides locate wells by memory and mirage testing, a practice involving running 300 paces toward shimmering pools to see if one's feet get wet. Failure means running back before dehydration claims purpose. You volunteer exactly 0 times. Bandits here use subtlety. They leave trail markers pointing to phantom oases, hoping to divert small groups into ambush. Orug counters by assigning scouts to erase or alter every suspicious pile of stones. At night, he nails horse skulls atop false cairns, macabre billboards reading "Detour at own peril." Whether the tactic deters thieves or just adds decor, morale improves. Even the Georgian jugglers return to practice, tossing fire gourds that hiss sparks into velvet sky. Halfway across the Gobi, a dust storm attacks without mercy. 1 minute sky is brass, next it turns ink. Wind screams, sand whips expose flesh like truncheons. Protocol demands kneeling camels, wrapping heads in felt and praying to any deity accepting new clients. You crouch, ledger shoved under tunic, taste grit that crunches between teeth like ground glass. Hours pass measured in burning lungs. When calm finally returns, you emerge looking centuries older, face exfoliated by nature's cruelest beautician. 2 wagons overturned, 1 jade crate missing. Nicolo digs through pepper sacks to find half have infiltrated with sand, an accidental spice blend sure to confuse future buyers. Desert breaks at last near a chain of caravanserais run by Muslim monks who claim descent from Alexander's retinue. They offer water, flatbread, and algebra lessons. For a price, they'll teach square roots by candlelight. You decline but donate pepper sprinkles for soup. Generosity buys goodwill, and goodwill buys faster gate clearance. In gratitude, the monks warn of brewing rebellion in Yuan lands, farmers starving, paper money losing credibility, whispers of red turbans raising armies. Trade thrives on chaos, but only if you outrun it. Crossing it a hexy corridor, the Great Wall's tendrils appear, rammed earth ridges snaking across hills like petrified dragons. Chinese border officials examine your paisi, sniff your pepper, and impose tea tax, 1 pound of your best goods for every cart. You expected this and packed decorative tins filled with inferior pepper mixed with roasted millet. Officials accept them with bureaucratic indifference. You silence guilt by recalling every bribe you paid since Genoa. Lanzhou city gates loom beneath cliffs stained by yellow river dust. Here, Silk Road arteries fuse into bustling pandemonium. Markets overflow with everything from Tibetan musk to Korean ginseng, and each vendor swears their product cures impotence, ghosts, or tax audits. You rent warehouse space behind a temple where monks chant so loudly thieves avoid lurking. Within days, you resell half your pepper to a Ming loyal agent who believes Yuan collapse imminent and wants portable wealth. You accept silver ingots stamped with cloud motifs, hefty, shiny, and redeemable even if dynasties trade places. Nicolo, always scanning for side hustles, negotiates a shipment of Sichuan rhubarb bound for Venetian apothecaries obsessed with laxatives. He lacks storage. You lease space in exchange for a future cut. Partnership, you realize, is equal parts trust and mutually assured bankruptcy. To celebrate, you both sample Lanzhou's famed hand-pulled noodles drenched in chili oil, so violent it tricks tongues into chasing water jugs across tables. Pain reminds you life still flows. After months of dryness, tears streaming down cheeks feels luxurious. The final overland sprint to Khanbalik edges along canal systems and mulberry groves, feeding imperial silkworms. Bureaucracy thickens. Checkpoint after checkpoint demands tallies, seals, and flower dust fingerprints. Your papers now weigh more than your merchandise, but you endure, propelled by visions of Yuan courtiers tossing silver sices like confetti for exotic spices, lacquerware, and any tale adventurous enough to distract from looming insurrection. At last the capital unfurls, walls high as ambitions, gatehouses painted vermilion, canals reflecting palaces so vast they warp horizon lines. Khanbalik, where polo fields sprawl beside execution grounds, and scholars debate Confucius 1 street over from Mongol wrestlers greased in sheep fat. Orog salutes his banner at caravan triumph achieved. He collects final fees, including a surcharge labeled surviving miscellaneous, and vanishes into barracks to negotiate next commission. You and Nicolo stand amid a rival chaos, pepper sand blend secured, lacquerware gleaming, rhubarb reeking faintly medicinal. Exhaustion hangs from shoulders, but pockets clink and eyes spark at hallways of opportunity. The future includes palace audiences, price wars with Arab spice barons, and potentially a hasty evacuation if rebellion lights fuse faster than trade deals close. For now, though, the Silk Road has delivered you to its beating heart, bruised but breathing. You stretch sore limbs, crack dust-scabbed knuckles, and smile the crooked smile of merchants who have licked death's boots, counted his teeth, and sold him shoelaces on the way out. Behind you lies a trail of buried oxen, melted snow, bribed officials, burned pepper, and one grateful child holding a snarling toothbird in Samarkand. Ahead lies whatever madness the Yuan twilight can conjure, and whatever margin you can carve from it before the world tilts again. Because if 2 continents worth of peril have taught anything, it's this: profit isn't the opposite of danger. It's the twin that survives by eating the other's lunch. And you, parchment-wearied, salt-caked, plague-dodging fool that you are still hungry.
10 seconds. Picture slipping into bed after a feast of roast swan and watered wine. Except the mattress is a giant leather sack of fermented moss. The sheets smell like wet dog in July, and the curtains are crawling with more noble lice than your family tree. 5 more seconds and you realize. Luxury. In a medieval castle meant surviving the night without contracting a new saint-named skin disease. Congratulations. Welcome to bedtime in the Middle Ages, where insomnia wasn't a condition, it was a lifestyle. If you were lucky enough to be born noble during the 13th century, your nights unfolded atop what chroniclers called a grand bed, and what modern hemorrhaging backs would label a war crime. Imagine a wooden frame hewn from local oak so green it still leaks sap in spring, topped by a lattice of ropes strung tighter than a monk's vow of silence. On those ropes you plop a tick-stuffed mattress, yes, the same tick we now hunt on forest hikes, a linen sleeve crammed with straw, reeds, or, for the upper crust, dry moss mixed with lavender sprigs. Lavender wasn't for scent, it was pungent bug spray. Bedmakers believed the smell offended fleas, a theory roughly as effective as scolding Vikings in Old Norse. Naturally, these mattresses flatten faster than a jester under a trebuchet. So every fortnight servants fluffed the tick by whacking it with wooden paddles, releasing small tornadoes of dust, dead skin, and the occasional unplanned wildlife. Did castles boast feather beds? Certainly, but good luck convincing geese to donate enough feathers to stuff a mattress larger than the average pantry door. A full goose down tick demanded plucking 200 birds, which explains why only kings or bishops slept on them and why everyone else slept on the goose equivalent of IOUs, a straw base sprinkled with exactly 7 symbolic feathers for bragging rights. Now let's flaunt the bed curtains, ostensibly privacy screens, actually medieval ecosystems. Nobles adored hanging rich fabrics from overhead testers, velvets imported from Lucca, brocades heavy enough to smother a conspiracy, and worsted wool dyed in eye-bruising heraldic colors. The curtains trapped heat in drafty chambers, yes, but they also trapped everything else: food smells, chamber pot vapors, gossip, and an entire purgatory of insect life. Picture being gently woken at dawn by a spider dangling inches from your nostril, as if auditioning to be your new confessor. Speaking of confessions, let's address pillows. Medieval pillows were not the fluffy clouds you punch into submission every night. They resembled miniature oatmeal sacks, linen stuffed with bran or straw and, on festive occasions, goose down. Medical treatises warned that soft pillows overheated the brain, making men effeminate and women hysterical. Solution? Keep them firm enough to remind sleepers of their mortality. Some lords even bragged that they used wooden headrests, copying crusader tales of ascetic monks who dozed upright to outmaneuver the devil. Because apparently the devil can tempt horizontal people only. Our bedtime ensemble continues with sheets, if you could afford them. Commoners slept in tunics. The upper classes enjoyed linen woven so coarsely it doubled as exfoliation. Bleaching required expensive wood ash and weeks of sun drying, so most sheets stayed off-white, trending toward battle map beige after a few months. Stains told stories: red wine from Michaelmas, grease from Twelfth Night Boar, maybe the odd alchemist experiment gone wrong. Laundering involved boiling linens with lye, beating them with wooden paddles beside rivers, and praying the stitching survived. If winter froze the river, linens froze too, becoming chilling sculptures waiting to thaw by hearths that produced more smoke than heat. Heat, or lack thereof, shapes our next misery: blankets. Wool dominated, but not the cuddly merino Instagram sells. We're talking scratchy warp-heavy fabric thick with lanolin and the faint aroma of pastoral despair. One blanket alone couldn't foil a stone tower's drafts, so castles piled them like geological strata. Servants unpacked them each night from wooden chests that exhaled cedar dust and mouse droppings, layering until you lay beneath textile tectonics heavy enough to prevent REM cycles. Dropping a blanket was a workout. Climbing from bed resembled an archaeological dig. Now let's to our accessories, starting with the bed warmer. A brass or copper pan filled with embers, slid between sheets moments before the Lord climbed in. Theoretically, it toasted the linens. Practically, it scorched holes and occasionally set entire beds aflame. Chronicles tell of one countess whose velvet counterpane ignited, prompting midnight chaos as footmen sprinted half-nude through corridors waving chamber pots of water. Afterward they merely patched the smoldered spot and called it ventilation. Candles offered ambience but dripped tallow onto sheets, attracting rodents who gnawed holes, which then welcomed drafts, which demanded more blankets, a vicious linen rodent blanket cycle. Some castles experimented with rushlight floor stands, reeds soaked in animal fat, burning a faint, greasy glow that filled curtains with smoke thick enough to marinate sleepers. Windows provided no relief, since glass was so expensive that most nobles preferred horn panes, thin translucent slices of cattle horn that distorted moonlight into ghostly goblin shapes perfect for fueling bedtime paranoia. Shall we discuss roommates? Privacy in medieval castles was rarer than soap at a tavern. Even the master bedchamber doubled as daytime office and nighttime dormitory for favored retainers. Wealthy couples often slept apart, partly virtue, partly survival. The lady kept her own solar upstairs, while the lord snored below with his hunting dogs, armor stands, and last night's political regrets. Servants slept on trundle beds rolled from under the main frame, ready to spring up if their lord called for water, prayers, or someone to confirm they weren't choking on a roasted dormouse bone from supper. Naturally, bodily functions joined the slumber party. Castle garderobes, a polite word for stone chutes over the moat, were seldom adjacent to bedchambers, so chamber pots starred in nocturnal rituals. These hefty ceramic or metal buckets sat beside the bed, lid optional, stench inevitable. Servants emptied them at dawn, hurling contents into cesspits or directly over parapets onto unsuspecting invaders, or peasants. In summer, the aroma marinated bed curtains, which no lavender or frankincense could fully mask. Romantic, right? While we're suffocating under curtains, let's address vermin hierarchy. Fleas at the bottom, bedbugs next, lice reigning supreme. A single medieval mattress could host an insect census that would give modern epidemiologists night terrors. To combat this, nobles scheduled bed turnings, where servants dismantled the entire bedding stack, beat each layer with sticks, and dusted the seams with ash, wormwood, or powdered iris root. Some households unleashed chickens to peck pests from mattresses, a poultry purge culminating in feathers, squawks, and occasional eggs laid where you least wanted breakfast. And yes, there was luxury amid all this. Queen Isabella of France's 14th century accounts list mattresses stuffed with swan's down, sheets edged in gold thread, and coverlets lined with sable fur. But keep reading and you find receipts for 4 dozen fleeces to repair the royal bedding, and 2 pounds of lye for washing after illness. Translation: even queens slept on patchwork nests requiring industrial cleaning when plague sniffed at the portcullis. Speaking of illness, medieval physicians blamed night airs for everything from lethargy to lumps. They advised raising bed frames at least 2 fists off the floor to escape poisonous miasma. Some lords took it further, propping one end higher to prevent humors pooling in the head. Guests unaware of these science experiments found themselves sliding downhill all night like potatoes in a tilted pan. Humor, or lack thereof, brings us to marital diplomacy. Castles were cold, marriages colder. Beds occasionally warmed alliances more than hearts. Royal couples met in ceremonious bedding rituals, witnessed by half the court to verify consummation, then parted ways to their own chambers and, rumor insists, to warmer bodies. The grand bed thus doubled as political stage and rumor engine. Sheets stained with wedding night evidence were displayed like holy relics. Failure to produce such proof could spark annulment or war. Imagine drifting to sleep knowing tomorrow your linen might be paraded through town square as fertility pamphlet. For children, the nursery offered scaled-down torment, cradle mattresses stuffed with chaff, swaddling so tight infants resembled overripe sausages, and canopies hung to deter drafts that medieval wisdom feared would warp a baby's bones. Herbal sachets dangled overhead to calm spirits, but mainly attracted moths. If the heir survived teething without contracting smallpox, servants celebrated by airing out the nursery bedding, often for the first time since birth. Did love exist amid this itchy, smoky, urine-adjacent wonderland? Sometimes. Chronicles tell of lordly couples sharing pillow talk under furs imported from Novgorod while scribes dozed nearby. They whispered state secrets, plotted lands, maybe even expressed genuine affection, before rolling over into pockets of mattress mold that induced coughing fits worthy of martyrdom. Regular cleaning rhythms mirrored liturgical calendars. Spring meant great airing, when bedding was dragged onto battlements to soak in sun and gossip. Winter demanded stuffing season, straw sacks emptied, mid-autumn harvest chaff inserted, and seams stitched with wax threads slippery as politics. Failed to restuff before Yuletide and you'd spend January nights negotiating with straw stalks sharp enough to pierce saintly calluses. Finally, consider the bed's symbolic gravity. It served as courtroom for oaths, deathbed for confessions, and stage for royal births attended by midwives, priests, and eager courtiers measuring potential inheritance. Beds were the thrones of private life, heavy, ornate, and dangerously flammable. A king died, priests sprinkled holy water, and scribes immediately inventoried the bedding, silks, furs, pillows. Because lineage might be divine right, but furniture was negotiable loot. So the next time you sink into a memory foam mattress and complain about Wi-Fi dead zones, picture a draft rolling through arrow-slit windows, fleas waltzing under your tunic, and moss straw poking kidneys while the scent of chamber pot stew drifts through embroidered curtains. Medieval luxury bedding? It was a testament to humanity's ability to romanticize misery with enough velvet, feathers, and bravado. And this is just night 1. Stick around for part 2, where we explore how servants, saints, and siege warfare turned bedtime into a spectator's sport no insomniac would dare miss. Picture a sullen dawn dripping through castle arrow slits, pink as a bruise on stone, and you'll find the castle household already knee-deep in what can only be described as the bedding Olympics. A dozen bleary-eyed servants are wrestling with the Lord's mattress like it owes them back wages, because today is turning day. Turning a mattress sounds elegant until you witness 4 people heaving a leather tick big enough to smother a pony, each corner stuffed with last autumn's straw now matted into geological layers of sweat, spilled ale, and regret. They grunt, twist, swear by minor saints you've never heard of, Saint Spirochete, patron of dubious odors, and finally flip it, unleashing a choking dust cloud. The cloud wafts through the solar, clinging to draperies that haven't seen sunlight since the last pope was excommunicated. Somewhere inside that haze, a flea coughs politely and asks for onions to go with its breakfast. No luxury routine ends with mere flipping. Once the mattress is airborne, the stuffing must be refreshed. The underfootman slices open a seam like a surgeon expecting straw to shriek, and out pours a tangle of broken reeds, lavender stems that died during the Crusades, and something that looks suspiciously like a desiccated frog. The contents are dumped into handcarts and trundled to the courtyard where chickens perform quality control by gobbling any moving particles. Meanwhile, new filling, gleaned from the recent harvest, waits in burlap sacks labeled finest rye chaff, as if advertising helps against mildew. The steward pinches a handful, judges texture and pesticide, pest and side, content, and declares it adequate for minor nobility. Translation: the castle lacks coin for goose-down replenishment this quarter, so straw it is, plus 2 fistfuls of mint to mask the agricultural aftersmell. While the mattress surgeons sew up their patient, another team tackles the rope lattice supporting it. Ropes sag over weeks, producing a nightly sensation of sinking into a friendly trench. Remedy: the bed key, a T-shaped iron crank designed to twist ropes until they squeal. Each heave of the key tightens the grid, hoisting the sleeping surface back to something approximating horizontal. If ropes snap, and they sometimes do, they whip across the room like an angry eel, leaving welts and a lesson in medieval physics. Indeed, Castle Annals record injuries blamed not on swords but on overenthusiastic bed tuning. One unfortunate squire lost 2 teeth. The rope returned to service before he did. Now cue the laundering squad, whose job is to drag sheets, thick, greasy, nearly self-aware, from oak chests perfumed with cedar shavings. The linen looks beige in torchlight but once unrolled, reveals artful constellations of stains, wine, candle wax, mystery gravy, and the occasional ink blot shaped like a heretical diagram. These linens must be boiled in cauldrons of lye, then pounded against washing stones down by the river, ideally before villagers lead their pigs to wallow upstream. After a day of beating, the fabric is draped over hedges to bleach under the benevolent disinterest of the sun. It emerges fractionally cleaner, plus sporting a rugged texture that exfoliates any sleepers back into the complexion of a peeled apple. Luxury demands embellishment, and for medieval beds that means embroidery. Castle seamstresses mend edges torn by restless barons and overzealous lovers, then embroider new motifs, hunting scenes, passages from psalms, occasionally bawdy jokes and Latin abbreviations readable only after squinting. Embroidery floss is dyed with madder root, red, or woad, blue, or, in particularly decadent households, imported cochineal insects crushed into a red so vivid it could shame a sunset. Each stitch whispers in Middle English, "Behold, your dignity is safe because your pillowcase points out you can afford decorative eagles fighting dragons above the drool stains." No bedding overhaul would be complete without fumigation. Enter the brazier, a bronze bowl on spider-legged tripod, into which servants dump a witch's brew mixture, pine resin, dried rosemary, and a knob of camphor so pungent it could resurrect a bishop. They carry the smoking bowl from corner to corner, closing curtains until the room thickens with a fog that disinfects or euthanizes, depending on dosage. Inhabitants emerge smelling like a spice merchant fell into a bonfire, an improvement over the default castle funk, but hardly subtle. Physicians swear the vapors repel, pestilential vapors. Courtiers privately fear it invites the fire brigade, 2 sleepy grooms with buckets. Even with all that, the real battlefield of luxury bedding is temperature control. Stone walls absorb cold like a miser hoards coins. A typical winter's eve sees frost blooming on interior surfaces, turning bed curtains stiff as ship's sails. To survive, nobles layer blankets in ludicrous quantities, first a woolen underrug looted from the last campaign in Flanders, then a felted horse cloth, then 2 sheepskins sewn together with the fleece inward, and finally a velvet coverlet dyed imperial purple to signal, "I'm freezing but still fashionable." Crawl under that, and you lie trapped beneath a thermal sandwich heavy enough to stunt circulation. Couples resort to strategic negotiation. Who gets to pivot under the weight to avoid smothering, and whose side sacrifices edge coverage to prevent draft infiltration. Failure leads to blanket divorce, where one partner moves to a side chamber stuffed with rushes, citing irreconcilable temperature differences. Summer flips the problem. Suddenly the castle becomes a kiln, and all that will equals medieval sauna. Curtains come down, theoretically. Mattresses are sometimes hauled onto parapets where night breezes flirt with any sleeper brave enough to risk arrows or bed droppings. Enter the cooling sheet, linen soaked in rosewater and wrung damp, spread across the bed an hour before turning in. Effect, blissful chill for roughly 15 minutes, followed by clammy misery until dawn. Some households experiment with bed fans, actual servants stationed at curtain gaps, waving palm fronds like bored cherubs in an illuminated manuscript. These human fans are paid in bread crusts and gossip. They trade arm cramps for insider knowledge of who snores like a lime kiln. Speaking of snores, acoustics matter. Tower chambers' echoes sound gloriously, transforming a mild snort into a demonic trumpet. Luxury attempts to muffle echoes with wall tapestries, scenes of Arthurian legend, biblical heroics, or occasionally the Lord's ancestors looking judgmental through moth-eaten faces. Tapestries are stuffed with wool batting, which helps insulate and encourages yet another ecosystem of moths living rent-free. The cycle is beautiful in its futility. Hang tapestries to silence the snore, then hire pages to clap cedar sticks yelling, "Begone!" to chase moths, which startle the snorer awake, which means everyone loses. Castles tourniquet by siege face special bedding protocols. When enemy catapults lob cows over walls, yes, sometimes warfare doubles as experimental gastronomy, vermin populations skyrocket. The steward's ledger lists emergency purchases, extra straw, bags of juniper berries, and a new mattress tick for the Duchess because her old one caught plague. Siege nights merge terror and tedium. Guards rotate through arrow slits, arrows whistle back, and inside, the noble family undertakes a bizarre slumber party. Mattresses dragged into the great hall now repurposed as panic dormitory. Privacy curtains are rehung between shield racks. Candles burn low. Someone's baby wails. Distant trebuchets thump like a colossal heartbeat. Luxury bedding now equals any padding between skull and flagstones when the tower shudders under impact. Let's peel away courtly glam and peek at servants' bedding, because luxury is relative. The chambermaid who pats down a countess's swan-down bolster at night will later collapse in the scullery atop a sack of pea straw beside the kitchen range, knees curled to avoid scuttling beetles. Her blanket is a discarded cloak with missing clasp. Her pillow, a folded apron that still reeks of goose grease. Yet on nights when the hearth embers glow and the straw pricks just right, she may sleep more deeply than the lord upstairs testing new featherbeds shipped from Bruges. Moral? Even in castles, comfort obeys quirks rather than cost. To maintain the illusion of hygiene, castle clerks track louse-combing schedules. Once a week, ladies-in-waiting gather at a sunny window, let hair tumble like silk waterfalls, and drag fine-toothed combs through each other's locks. Captive lice are cracked between thumbnails with audible pops. Meanwhile, their mattresses receive identical attention, seams pried open to hunt clusters of eggs, which servants burn with tapers while reciting psalms, just in case lice harbor microdemons. Records show some households offered louse bounties, a copper coin per 10 insects caught. Entrepreneurial pages allegedly imported extra specimens from stables to inflate income. Proof any economy invites creative loopholes. Royal progresses introduce mobile luxury, the traveling bed. Picture a collapsible wooden frame, dowel joints, ropes pre-knotted, all bundled onto pack horses alongside wine barrels. Destination reached, servants erect the portable throne in whichever monastery guest house or manor hall bribes enough to host. The mattress travels too, rolled like a giant pastry filled with straw that leaks across roads, leaving botanists centuries later to map royal itineraries by stray oat species. Portable canopies unfurl embroidered with the arms of England or France, depending on who currently owns that patch of countryside. Local peasants gawk at a bed worth more than their annual grain tithe, then return to cottages where bedding equals bracken on dirt under a dog. Nothing in medieval domesticity escapes the church, and bedding is no exception. Sumptuary laws regulate fabric grades, commoners forbidden velvet, merchants banned from silver embroidery unless they donate a tenth to alms. Confessors warn against lustful linens, sheets dyed scarlet that might inflame carnal appetites. Priests preach moderation, 3 blankets maximum lest sloths seduce. Yet bishops themselves commission quilts stuffed with silk floss imported via Venice and priced like cathedral spires. Hypocrisy sleeps comfortably beneath goose down. Occasionally, bedchambers moonlight as interrogation rooms. Chronicles speak of jealous kings ordering mattresses slit to uncover hidden love letters, money pouches, or worse, foreign coins implying treachery. One duchess famously embedded a silver dagger in her featherbed for midnight protection, only to forget, roll over, and stab her yoga predecessor in the hip. Medieval yoga being a tempting prayer pose without splitting hose. Court poets turned the incident into bawdy verse sung by minstrels until the duchess bribed them with furs to change the rhyme. Fur, by the way, is winter's final bedding boss fight. sable from Muscovy, ermine from Brittany, lynx for those who enjoy novelty leopard spots without the Dubai price tag. These pelts line coverlets, edge cushions, even wrap around bedposts for decorative swagger. But fur invites its own menagerie, fleas addicted to mammal oils. After one festive Yule, King Edward I allegedly ordered all ermine coverlets boiled, producing a stew smell that lingered until Candlemas. Courtiers coined a new fragrance level, boiled beaver, used to describe anything nauseating yet undeniably expensive. And when the last candle gutters, when hush settles heavy enough to bury whispers, the true luxury of a medieval bed emerges: survival until sunrise. If the wolf chorus stays outside the walls, if the draft spares you frostbite, if the straw doesn't harbor black-spotted rats, and if politics hasn't demanded midnight assassinations, then congratulations. You awaken on sheets wrinkled like battlefield maps, hair smelling of juniper smoke, body striped with rope indentations, yet technically alive. A servant fetches warmed ale, the steward notes straw replacements in tomorrow's ledger, and somewhere a minstrel prepares a song praising the Lord's unrivaled comfort. Because that, dear insomniacs of posterity, was luxury bedding in a castle, a daily, multi-species pageant of maintenance, mythology, and marginally controlled chaos where opulence competed with entropy and neither fully won. And if you think the nobles of Europe had cornered the market on nocturnal absurdity, wait until Part 3, when we head to monasteries, crusader camps, and plague quarantine ships, proving that anywhere humans tried to sleep, history gleefully tucks them in with a slap. If you've followed our itchy pilgrimage thus far, you already know that noble bedding inside stone fortresses was a magnificent tightrope act between opulence and outright biohazard. But outside the gilded echo chambers of Europe's great halls, countless souls also needed a nightly truce with gravity: soldiers, monks, plague doctors, and anyone unlucky enough to draw quarantine ship duty from the big medieval hat of misfortune. Part 3, therefore, shoves us beyond castle walls and hair-pinches us into 3 arenas where the word luxury wore a decidedly ironic grin: fortified monasteries, crusader encampments, and floating pest prisons bobbing just off harbor. Fair warning, whatever crumbs of comfort we uncovered under noble mattresses will feel like spa vouchers after this. Monastic sleep, chaste, cheap, and chafing. Contrary to popular belief, monks didn't spend every hour copying psalms in dim libraries. They also had to sleep, preferably in ways that wouldn't tempt Satan or, worse yet, each other. Rulebooks like the Benedictine Regula insisted on dormitory life. Long timber halls called dorter, from Latin dormitorium, where dozens of beds aligned like tame dominoes. Privacy was antithetical to humility, so partitions were outlawed until the late Middle Ages, meaning you drifted off listening to Brother Gerbert gargle scripture while Brother Wulfric auditioned for a snoring competition. A monk's standard bedding kit consisted of 3 ingredients: a straw pallet, a wool blanket, and despair. The straw came from monastery fields, each stalk inspected to ensure it wasn't too fragrant, lest sensual aromas kindle impure dreams about, brace yourself, cabbage farming. Pallet covers were rough hemp stitched by novices as penance for daydreaming during sext. On top lay a single blanket woven from coarse monastery sheep, lanolin unwashed so it could double as waterproofing, and apparently, personality test: if you didn't itch, you lacked enough devotion. Pillows? Officially banned in many orders. Popes fretted that cervical comfort would unleash waves of heresy before sunrise. Yet loopholes bloomed. Cistercians allowed a pillow of honest hardness, meaning a linen bag half filled with dried peas, the medieval equivalent of sleeping on a sack of marbles. Carthusian hermits, ever competitive, used a block of wood wrapped in cloth. Legend says one friar Odilo carved his pillow into a crucifix, claiming spinal alignment with Christ's suffering. Medical historians suspect he aligned himself straight into lifelong migraines. Heating the dorter posed theological quandaries. Fireplaces risked sparks and, worryingly, comfort. Instead, monks embraced a different technology. Layered penitents. They wore their wool habits to bed, plus a hood pulled over the forehead like a built-in sleep mask. Night breezes howled through shutterless windows, so some abbeys installed cowhide curtains, budget versions of castle brocades, flapping like demonic wings whenever wind changed direction. For soundproofing, monks relied on the Great Silence rule, no speech between Compline and Lauds. This noble ideal evaporated whenever Brother Wulfric's sinuses played trombone. Chroniclers record entire door-to-rows tapping him with broom handles, thereby inventing the first documented form of passive-aggressive white noise cancellation. Once a year, usually in Lent, the dormitory underwent a purificatio grandis. Pallets were dragged into cloisters, beaten with alder rods, and dusted with lime to massacre lice colonies. Lime powder, alas, also strips skin moisture, turning monks' elbows into topographical maps of the Sinai. Yet they thanked God for cleansing fire, while novices secretly cursed the day lime was invented. At least the bed-beating doubled as exercise, ticking the manual labor box before Vespers. For senior monks, abbots, priors, a side chamber called a cell, root of our modern word. Sell yourself short on comfort. Offered marginal upgrades, maybe 2 blankets, perhaps canvas curtains, and in rare lavish houses, a feather pillow rumored to have belonged to a visiting bishop. That single artifact circulated like relic trade. An abbot might lend it to a feverish brother for one night, annulling any illusions of luxury faster than you can chant Kyrie eleison. Despite the austerity, monks bragged that communal sleep kept them disciplined. They rose from matins at 2 a.m., kneeling on stone floors until blood pooled in ankles, then returned for a second nap cynically dubbed the little sleep. Modern sleep scientists might call this biphasic pattern avant-garde. Medieval monks called it God's scheduling quirk. Either way, by sunrise their straw pallets resembled hay bales after a goat riot. Luxury, redefined as slightly drier than the stable. Crusader camps, field mattresses, scorpion linens, and the holy goose-down hustle. Leap from cloisters to Levantine dust, and meet Crusader knights bedding down between sieges. Picture parchment tents pitched on rocky hillsides, lit by torches that doubled as mosquito lures. Supplies traveled slower than plague rumors, so bedding ran a spectrum from noble extravagance to dirt nap. Top-tier knights imported collapsible field beds, X-shaped wooden frames with leather slings, rolled into packs by squires. These contraptions kept torsos inches above scorpion patrols, crucial in regions where every rock housed arthropods offended by foreign hymns. Over the sling they spread a peau de cheval, horsehide, hair side up for warmth. Forget lavender. The bouquet here was eau de equine plus salt-dried sweat. Yet our gallant crusaders considered it superior to sleeping directly on volcanic gravel, which exfoliated faster than any monastic blanket. Mattresses were rarer. Some lords bribed Syrian traders to supply camel hair cushions, a fabric marketed as cooler than European wool. It was cooler because densities of lice differed. Camel hair hosted sand fleas instead, a delightful cross-cultural exchange. Feather pillows, if present, were stuffed with goose down shipped from the motherland. Chronicles mention a knight who sold his warhorse to buy a down pillow after discovering his lance arm fell asleep nightly. That pillow allegedly accompanied him into 3 battles strapped behind his shield, proof that comfort addictions outlive common sense. Rank-and-file infantry got earth beds. They scraped shallow trenches, filled them with leaves or sand, then unrolled cloaks on top. Rain turned trenches into soup. Improvisation followed. Invert shields for drainage, layer reed mats, borrowed from local vineyards, or, in desperation, cuddle pig carcasses for warmth, hoping not to become breakfast for jackals. Spiritual comfort came from chaplains sprinkling holy water over bedding, which dried to a crunchy crust conducive to blister formation. In siege situations, bedding also functioned as armor. During the drawn-out assault on Acre, 1189-1191, knights lined trench walls with mattress ticks to absorb arrow impact. Medieval memory foam, minus memory and foam. Linen scraps stuffed into helmet rims served as makeshift sweatbands, though they soaked through in minutes, trickling brine down chainmail like portable pickling systems. Crusader laundries, where they existed, operated on a barter system. 1 wash equals 3 coins, unless the water carrier fancies your knife more. Soap, imported from Aleppo, contained laurel oil so caustic it could peel paint off fortress doors. Bedding emerged brighter but 30% lighter, fabric dissolved into ephemeral evangelism. Rather than risk destruction, many soldiers shook their linens, waved incense, and called it spiritual purification. Odor plus rosaries equaled hygiene by faith. Female camp followers, laundresses, cooks, merchants, introduced rare luxuries, patchwork quilts stitched from leftover surcoats, dyed maddereds so bloodstains blended. Crusader chroniclers praised these quilts as morale boosters, albeit scandalous in color intensity. The church debated whether crimson bedding incited lust. Soldiers argued it hid fleas. Victory went to pragmatism. The quilts stayed, fleas adapted. Speaking of fleas, they became diplomatic assets. Enemy lines sometimes catapulted bags of infested bedding over fortifications. Early biowarfare. Recipients either burned booty or, rumor states, catapulted it back, escalating into a plague ping-pong. Historians dispute efficiency. Fleas left in sun-drenched courtyards often perished. But morale damage was real. Nothing crushes crusading zeal like a surprise itch beneath chain-mail coif. Plague quarantine ships, floating bunkers of buboes and burlap. Finally, let's sail to Europe's ports circa 14th century Black Death, where authorities parked incoming merchant cogs offshore for 40 days, 40 giorni, to ensure nobody disembarked with Yersinia souvenirs. Quarantine ships were maritime limbos, stuck between home and death, crew dwindling, cargo spoiling, bedding petrifying. Vessels retrofitted for quarantine boasted tiered bunks hammered from rough pine, coated in tar to deter rot and ironically foster headaches. Sailors surrendered hammocks, seen as too easy to disinfect, to wooden planks wide enough for one but infested enough for many. Mattresses? None. Instead, each bunk issued a burlap sack and a promise, fill with straw, or sail with splinters. Straw shipments arrived sporadically via rowboats piloted by men in waxed canvas. Plague hoods, that made them resemble sorrowful beaks. Between deliveries, sailors stuffed sacks with rope scraps, mildew-patched sails, even shredded prayer scrolls. Burlap's weave was so loose the stuffing leaked like gossip, creating corridors coated in fiber drifts. Laundry on board? Ha! Regulations forbade crew from tossing bedding overboard. Floating fabrics could carry contagion to shore. Instead, they dunked linens in seawater, stretched them across rigging, and let sun bleach away sins. Seagulls contributed by pecking at lice, achieving an ecosystemic partnership rivaling any monastic chicken purge. Some captains ordered barrels of vinegar poured over bunks. The fumes etched lungs raw yet hardly dented pathogen parties. Temperature control stabbed both directions. Mediterranean summer turned holds into steaming cauldrons. North Sea winter's ice blankets into armored shingles. Sailors on Venetian galley Santa Verita recorded chiseling their bedding free each dawn, then curling around oil lamps for warmth, flirting with asphyxiation thanks to lamp fumes. Those who survived joked they'd been brined like sardines, ready for Lent. Psychologically, quarantine beds became confessionals. Men scratched tally marks on bunk planks, days stranded, friends buried at sea, prayers unanswered. They carved crude saints, hoping with saints outranked woodworm. Some bartered bunk locations. Upper tiers fetched higher prices for airflow, lower tiers convenient for vomiting over rails. Morality sagged. Bunks witnessed dice games wagering crates of spice, fistfights over fresh straw, rumors of ghost rats immune to traps and sermons. When the 40 days finally expired, assuming plague hadn't renewed its contract, officials rode out bearing parchment stamped with city seals and usually a bribe invoice disguised as sanitation fee. Bedding was ordered burned on floating pyres. quarantine fire festivals turning linens to ash, ash to diplomatic smoke signals. Survivors rode ashore delirious, stinking of vinegar and despair, ready to kiss dirt and immediately itch because dirt had fewer fleas than the memories coiled in their hair. Convergence, why luxury, remained relentlessly aspirational. After trudging through cloisters, crusades, and cholera rafts, beds back in European castles start to resemble five-star resorts, even with goose-down IOUs and rope welts. Yet a common thread unspools across all three arenas. Bedding was never static furniture. It was active equipment in the medieval survival kit. Comfort played hide-and-seek with practicality, faith, and warfare. Monks weaponized discomfort to fight temptation, proving virtue tastes like straw. Crusaders weaponized bedding, literally padding trenches and catapults with fabric that once cradled dreams now fueling sieges. Quarantine officers treated bedding as biohazard currency, burned today, bribed tomorrow. And underlying each scenario seethed the eternal trifecta of medieval dread: vermin, miasma, fire. Whether you chanted psalms, cried, Deus vult, or coughed quarantine symphonies, your bedding's highest vocation was to not kill you faster than entropy. So next time you slip under microfiber sheets and whine about your partner hogging the duvet, charter a phantom time machine and ask a plague sailor to trade places. He'll accept before you finish the sentence, burlap in hand, fleas applauding. Yet our exploration isn't over. Part 4 will yank the sheets from royal deathbeds, witch trial prisons, and the dawn of Renaissance mattress technology, proving that even as silk replaced straw and springs replaced ropes, humanity insisted on making bedtime an extreme sport. Bring your figurative bedkey. We'll tighten those ropes until the story squeaks for mercy. If medieval nights were an obstacle course, the royal deathbed was its glittering, dreadful finish line, a stage on which wealth, faith, medicine, and political spin all fought for front row pillow rights. The same four-poster that had hosted coronation consummations and pillow-muffled intrigues now became a slow-motion theater of mortality. Courtiers queued to witness final breaths, because nothing authenticated a monarch's last will like seeing, and loudly describing, the exact moment his jaw went slack. Yet despite the solemn set dressing, candles, relics, sobbing confessors, the mattress itself was usually the least heavenly object in the room. Start with Henry V of England, who died in 1422 lying on a bed valued at £300, roughly the GDP of a mid-sized shire. The frame glittered with gilded lions, the counterpane shimmered with cloth of gold, and the pillows bulged with down plucked from Cypriot swans. But the records also itemize. 2 pounds of camphor to abate odors, a discreet hint that royal guts behaved like everyone else's when plague and dysentery barged in. Servants sprinkled rose petals across sheets so thickly that observers claimed Henry looked like a martyrized florist. Luxury? Absolutely, if you ignored the stench of decay seeping through woven bullion threads like truth through propaganda. Deathbeds served propaganda beyond olfactory distraction. Chroniclers were invited to note the monarch's serene posture, implying divine favor. To secure that posture, attendants sometimes tied ankles together with silk ribbons or wedged wooden boards beneath sagging shoulders, essentially staging a final portrait shot before rigor mortis could freestyle. The mattress tick might be restuffed hours prior, ensuring that illustrious limbs rested on fresh, pest-free straw. Scrambling footmen called this last-minute refurbishment stuffing for the soul. No one mentioned that ripping open seams released centuries of latent flea eggs, a funeral confetti ready to colonize whoever inherited the room. Queens died differently, surrounded not only by clerics but by midwives, because childbirth rarely clocked out even for regnal VIPs. Jane Seymour, third wife of Henry VIII, expired 12 days after producing the long-awaited heir, her bed linens described as exceeding rich yet changed 7 times in a single night. Each change required burning the previous set outside the palace to contain contagion. Imagine a bonfire of silk sparkling like dying stars, perfumed by the faintly tragic scent of childbirth and cinnamon. The message to nobles, royal purity justifies torching enough cloth to clothe a county. The message to servants, keep the torches handy, someone important is always bleeding. Yet even as death made bedding simultaneously staged prop and biohazard, a quieter revolution was smoldering in linen cupboards across Europe. Trade routes fattened, Renaissance textile guilds perfected weaves. Stuffed sacks of scratchy straw began ceding territory to something miraculous called the wolf-lock mattress. Shepherds sheared finer fleeces, merchants combed out coarse fibers, and mattress makers packed the fluff into tightly woven ticking lined with canvas. Wool resisted mold better than straw and, crucially, rebounded when beaten. A Duchess of Milan reportedly bragged in 1498 that her new bed rose each morning as plump as the Virgin's cushion, a line equal parts piety and pillow flex. Springs soon followed, albeit in embryonic form, spiral ropes threaded with metal rings to add bounce beneath the mattress. Wealthy Florentines commissioned local smiths to forge serpent coils, which critics claimed hissed when sat upon, prompting superstitious owners to bless beds with holy water before sleeping. Whether or not the springs squeaked satanically, they signaled a tectonic shift. Bedding was no longer purely static padding but a mechanical device leveraging physics for comfort. Somewhere in Tuscany, a mathematician surely calculated tension angles while pretending to order more wine. Parallel innovations sprouted north in Flanders, epicenter of flax. Flemish linen mills churned out sheets so fine they earned the nickname poor man's silk. Except no poor man could afford them. The weave exploited water-powered looms that beat threads to near translucence. The result draped over bodies like whispered apologies for centuries of exfoliating burlap. Burgundian ledgers show dukes gifting newlywed daughters 12 pairs of night clouds. The marketing department had arrived. Each set cost as much as a modest townhouse and required laundering by specialists who used soapwood foam instead of lye to avoid shredding. Linen thus ascended from itchy necessity to status billboard, flapping from laundry lines like social media hashtags you could see from neighboring keeps. But while Renaissance Italy and Burgundy luxuriated, England's witch trial era kinked bedding in a decidedly darker direction. Between 1560 and 1660, no object in a suspected witch's cottage escaped forensic paranoia, least of all her bed. Witch-finders ransacked pallets searching for demonic tokens, toad bones stuffed into ticking, poppets sewn into pillow seams, or devilish teats hidden beneath straw. The infamous Matthew Hopkins, self-styled witch-finder general, insisted any lumpy mattress might conceal a familiar spirit. He ordered beds dismantled in front of magistrates, straw spilled across courthouse floors like guilty confetti. Women who had carefully hoarded rye chaff to cushion arthritic hips saw their modest luxury weaponized against them. Conversely, the gentry indulged in featherbeds so overstuffed that even a stowaway cat would smother, guaranteeing no witch could hide inside without asphyxiating. Comfort, it seemed, had become an alibi. At roughly the same time, seafaring empires exported bedding philosophies abroad. Spanish galleons shipped mahogany four-poster frames to colonies, while colonists shipped back exotic fillers, kapok fiber from tropical ceiba trees, lighter and springier than wool. Kapok mattresses impressed aristocrats in Lisbon but confounded housekeepers. They repelled water so fiercely that spilled wine beaded on the surface, rolling into floor cracks where it fermented and scented bedchambers with tipsy humidity. English pamphlets mocked float beds as foreign fripperies likely to harbor Catholic sympathies along with bedbugs. Yet by 1650, kapok found its way into London upholstery, proving xenophobia loses when innovation promises better naps. Prisons, too, learned the PR value of bedding. After the 1729 Bridewell scandal, where city inspectors discovered inmates sleeping on bare planks slick with sewage, municipalities upgraded to straw pallets, then trumpeted the change in broadsheets as penal progress. But straw pallets turned prisons into granaries for lice. Outbreaks forced authorities to issue weekly rationed straw refreshings, inspiring convicts to steal stuffing for clandestine cigarette papers. Administrators responded by mixing straw with hair shorn from new arrivals. Itchy justice achieved. Meanwhile, Parisian boudoirs witnessed the apotheosis of luxury, the lit à la duchesse, a bed so enormous it required a ceiling canopy suspended by invisible rods, making sleepers appear staged inside a floating pavilion. Court gossips swore Louis XIV traveled with his own mattress to maintain royal alignment. Valets hoisted it onto a carriage roof when the Sun King toured provinces, creating what may be history's first mattress-tied road hazard. Peasants waved at the passing cloud of goose feathers while their own bedding still crackled with barley husks. Social hierarchy, illustrated in upholstery. That golden age of plush opulence coincided with the scientific revolution's underappreciated contributions to sleep hygiene. Early chemists isolated potassium nitrate, not only useful for gunpowder but also recommended, in minuscule doses, to rinse linens and deter mites. Apothecaries sold saltpetre dream sachets, promising pest-free slumber. Unaware of respiratory risks, aristocrats stuffed sachets under pillows until headaches convinced them to downgrade to lavender again. Progress, like bedtime, often circles back. Which leads us to the industrial era prologue and a humble invention called the wire coil spring, patented in 1865 by German Heinrich Westphal. His mattress combined tempered steel coils with horsehair padding, finally evicting straw to the barn for good. Westphal died penniless, never sleeping on his own invention, an irony that medieval jesters would have milked for weeks. But his design detonated comfort hierarchies. Mass-produced springs democratized bounce. By 1880, middle-class families across Europe retired atop coil mattresses layered with cotton batting, a fabric once reserved for Renaissance gloves. Luxury migrated downward, and straw's reign ended not with a royal decree but with factory whistles. Yet even as springs creaked into parlors, castle keeps retained their antique beds for ceremony. The Tower of London still displays Henry VIII's great bed, ropes expertly retightened every decade. Tourists marvel at its monstrous scale, velvet canopy, and carved cherubs resembling hungover putty. Guides omit the footnotes about flea torments and mattress mold. Indignities fade behind varnish. Luxury, sanitized by centuries, becomes a bedtime story. So where does that leave our long journey from moss sacks to mass-market mattresses? Perhaps here. Luxury bedding in medieval and early modern worlds wasn't a static object but a perpetual arms race between comfort and calamity, technology and superstition, status and survival. For every feather tick stitched with silver thread, a swarm of lice plotted insurrection. For every convent rule banning pillows, a monk stuffed his hood with herbs. For every royal quilt of ermine fur, servants hauled chamber pots whose fumes could unmake glamour in seconds. And no matter the century, someone always believed the next stuffing, kapok, cotton, steel coils, would finally banish discomfort forever. It never did, of course. Even today, we wage micro-crusades against allergens, overheating memory foam, and fitted sheets that pop off corners at 3 a.m. The battleground has modern lighting, but the enemy roster, itch, odor, noise, existential dread, remains stubbornly familiar. If medieval barons time-traveled, they'd envy our thread counts yet laugh at our insomniac tweets. Meanwhile, we grumble at hotel pillows without considering how much straw once lodged in royal eardrums. So tonight, when you slip under climate-balanced duvets engineered by aerospace refugees, spare a nod to the parade of sleepers who came before. Monks bruised by penance straw, crusaders spooning scorpions, plague sailors chiseling ice blankets, queens perfumed by camphor as they bled beneath brocade. Their collective tossing and turning flattened paths that led to your mattress. And one day, future archaeologists might unearth your memory foam relic, marvel at its chemicals, and wonder how you endured such primitive luxury. Until then, keep your sheets laundered, your mattress periodically rotated, no alder rods required, and your sense of humor tucked beside the extra pillow. Because if history teaches anything, it's that the gap between opulent and utterly ridiculous is thinner than the weave on a Flemish linen, and the next innovation is probably itching to make you itch in new, exciting ways.